This is the best racing game series that you've never played, and I'm gonna prove to you why. Growing up on the streets of Need for Speed, Burnout, and Forza Horizon took a toll on forming every opinion I was ever going to have about every racing game in the future. My opinion is harsh and blunt, with most racing games never even catching my attention. Back in the 2000s though, when I was a little kid, either realistic sims were your go-to, or it was wacky street racers, or it was Mario Kart. But I inevitably grew out of the genre when racing games took a nosedive in quality in the 2010s. There's exceptions to this for sure, but in the 2000s, racing games were everything. They were unanimously accepted by everyone, whether it was a realistic racing simulation game or it was an extreme sports title. Think Gran Turismo is the realistic racing sim of the 2000s, whereas Need for Speed is an extreme sports game, and Mario Kart is the competitive racer that exists just to cause divorces. The floodgates opened in the 2000s. Pandora's hood was opened and racing games came flying out of every corner and from every company. Burnout, Dirt, Carmageddon, Forza, Gran Turismo, ATV, Ford Racing, Excitebike, Blur, and so many more. All these games had one main thing in common though, and that was that each game had their own unique twist that made their franchise have a consistent pathway to go down. Like they had a formula, they had a gimmick, they had something that made their franchise survive and have so much longevity. Consistency. They had consistency in their unique gimmick or twist. Need for Speed is an edgy street racing game, Burnout is chaotic with its road chases that are topped off with amazing physics, and Forza is a sim arcade racer with beauty taking center stage in the Forza Horizon series in particular. Gran Turismo with F1 right beside it were being looked at as the original modern racing simulation games that started in 1997. Now you have tons of other games that are up there in the realistic racing simulation genre like iRacing, but the problem is that these are all $1,000 plus dumps that you just find on Steam. They are so much money. You have to dump so much money into these to get everything. It's ridiculous. And I can't lie to you and pretend like I've played every racer or even played a ton of iRacing. I don't even know a lot about real cars, but what I lack in car knowledge is what I make up for in video game knowledge. I do know that racing games were on the minds of everybody in their youth in the 2000s. Almost every game publisher was releasing AAA high quality racing games. I know what these developers were attempting to accomplish in creating that unique twist that would remain synonymous with the franchise's identity and name. Need for Speed is an edgy street racing game. They would become synonymous to each other because that was the identity of that series. And even when they would fall out of that identity, out of that unique twist, like Need for Speed has done a couple of times in the 2010s, they are constantly reminded by the fans that they need to go back to their roots. And that's why fans love a game like Need for Speed Heat. They always end up coming back around with a game like Need for Speed Heat that's loved by many fans because it has that Need for Speed core identity. That consistency that makes it Need for Speed with the edginess, the cop chases, and everything else that comes with that franchise. And whenever they do fall out of it, like with the Need for Speed reboot from 2015, they are instantly reminded by their fans as to why they need to go back to their core identity to begin with. I don't play Need for Speed to play Blur. I don't play Need for Speed to play Gran Turismo. I play Need for Speed to play Need for Speed. When I entered high school and I was kind of phasing out of the racing game craze, I was told about this game called Midnight Club from that one friend that we all had when we were a freshman that was going into college. Or was that just me? Was that creepy? I don't really even know, to be honest. Whatever, the point is that at the time, Midnight Club was the 6th highest selling racing franchise ever, and yet I had never even heard of it outside of my mysterious college friend. I'm just being honest that none of my thoughts on Midnight Club really mattered at that time because the only thing I knew about it was that it was made by Rockstar San Diego. What matters from that time is that I never heard of it, because this past month when I was playing through an exhaustive amount of Midnight Club, I realized that this franchise doesn't have any set rule, it doesn't have any consistency that the other street racing titles have, but yet, while I was driving around in Midnight Club 3, I just threw down my controller and I said, damn, this is one of the best racers I've ever played. Most of us nowadays have never even played it. The greatest racer that you've never played. That's a depressing thought. How was Rockstar San Diego, that was formerly known as Angel Studios, a new company to gaming, going to create one of the greatest racing franchises ever? How was Rockstar Games going to react to the success of Midnight Club, considering that at that point in time it was the 6th highest selling racing franchise? We're going to look at all of this. We're going to see the ups and downs of the Midnight Club series and why nobody has ever heard of it at all. You know how this is going to be. You're going to get some development history, some fun facts, a review, and an answer to why Midnight Club 5 was never created, despite being the 6th highest selling racing franchise ever. Rockstar North, the only Rockstar studio at the time in 1999, just got done rolling out Grand Theft Auto 2, and with that game's success, Rockstar HQ was now on a roll, buying up developer after developer, with their sights set on creating a team that would make them into a AAA publisher. They wanted to become a publisher that could compete with 2000s video game mammoths like EA and Blizzard, which in hindsight both have fallen from grace, but Rockstar still remains as one of the #1 most looked forward to publishers in gaming, with the most watched video game trailer on YouTube being Grand Theft Auto 6. No. We are not going to talk about how Subway Surfers still has that record beat. You're lying, I'm not talking about it. Rockstar headquarters, while increasing their repertoire, partnered up with developer Angel Studios. Who is Angel Studios, though? Angel Studios, at the time of partnering up with Rockstar Games, was known for releasing a little racing game called Midtown Madness for Microsoft. But even before that, Angel Studios was only able to make Midtown Madness after proving themselves to the video game community by completing one of the most impressive video game ports ever conceived.
Resident Evil 2.
Capcom wanted a port for RE2 to go on the Nintendo 64, but it was basically seen as an impossible task. The Angels of Angel Studios ascended to make the impossible possible. Look at this version of RE2. Now, look at the N64 version. You can see some minor differences here, but would you believe that this game, the Nintendo 64 version of Resident Evil 2, was 10% of the entire original game's file size? I'm not joking. 10%. They condensed down so much of RE2 that they were able to make it 1/10 of the original game so it could work with Nintendo 64. And it isn't even a bad port. It feels, and look at it, it looks relatively the same as the original game. Let's look at this even from a modern day standpoint, where MK1 is broken at 50 gigabytes on Nintendo Switch. Importing an old game like Battlefront 1 and Battlefront 2 costs us 68 gigabytes for PC. And still manages to be broken. They condensed and downsized one of my all-time favorite horror video games for an N64, made it 1/10 of the size, and they made it work against all odds. That was impressive back then, and that's still impressive nowadays. And that was impressive to the gaming community in 1998. But most importantly, Angel Studios was outdoing themselves and their own slogan as a company. This is directly in line with what Angel Studios was founded upon, because it started as an animation studio in the 80s, then slowly became a game studio, especially once they signed an agreement with Nintendo to help them out with a variety of projects on the Nintendo 64. And finally, after 1998, the same year as that Resident Evil 2 port, they got to make their first ever fully developed video game, and it was just called Major League Baseball Game. That's the actual title. Not messing with you, it's Major League Baseball Game. It's kind of just a lame title. That was the first game. Cut them some slack. It's a sports game. They all got lame titles. They started the company looking to advance tech and advance what they could do with animation. One thing led to the next, and now they ended up working in video games. But that fit in with everything they were trying to do. Their studio founder, Diego Angel, described their company as wanting to help pave the way for the future of art. And future of art could not be more synonymous with video games, especially in the 80s and 90s. Their narrative as a company never died out, whether they were working in animation or working in video games. That narrative is why they got where they are today. Starting as an animation studio, evolving tech, well, kind of evolving tech, but eventually creating the future of art in video games. They applied this philosophy to every job they'd ever take, and they even tried to create a title for Xbox called X-Girl, where you could have a virtual girlfriend. People never change. Even back in the 2000s, people didn't want to meet other real humans, and instead they just wanted to put all their hopes and dreams into a piece of software that will never critique them and only say good things about them, so they can become codependent on it, but it will never say no to them because it's just a piece of software that's designed to make them feel good about themselves. Angel Studios, though, might have thought that was a little bit too far into the future of art because they never actually ended up making X-Girl. So let's race over to their job to create Midtown Madness with Microsoft, which released in the year 1999. And directly after that, they released Midtown Madness 2 in 2000. And interestingly enough, Midtown Madness, I bring it up a lot because it shares a lot of similar DNA to Midnight Club. Whether it be the open road races, where you have some agency in the path that you take, you hit checkpoint after checkpoint that was mapped out on the open road and is shown on your minimap at all times, and that you could cruise that same open world city in between races. Through the years 1998 and 1999, Rockstar Games discussed partnering with Angel Studios after seeing this talented, career-focused studio that hadn't been corrupted by the larger industry yet. They didn't purchase Angel Studios right away, believe it or not. That's a funny story for later. But this partnership was the start to their relationship that would make Angel Studios eventually become Rockstar San Diego. Angel Studios signed on to create 2 racing franchise IPs for Rockstar. One was called Smuggler's Run, which, as the title suggests, you play as a taxi driver racing against gangsters within a city. Oh wait, that's Midnight Club. Smuggler's Run, obviously you play as a smuggler, right? And you must avoid border patrols, cops, and rival smuggling gangs and the SWAT teams of the world. I feel like Angel Studios went into these 2 properties with the mindset to make these 2 games very similar to one another and not very different from Midtown Madness, their previous IP. Let me explain this because I am convinced that Midnight Club and Smuggler's Run are very similar with just some surface level changes to differentiate them. I'll explain. Both have non-linear checkpoint systems, but Midnight Club has obstacles on the map through its buildings since you are in a city, whereas Smuggler's Run has obstacles through the terrain like hills, mountains, and rocky roads. They both have multiple biomes to explore, but one of them is based in city biomes while the other one is based in empty no man's land-esque areas. Smuggler's Run differentiates itself by not driving to these checkpoints from racers, but rather from cops that want to arrest you, the biomes that are not cities, but rather they are a forest, a desert, and the tundra. The landscapes are either bumpy or flat, which is to compensate for the lack of traffic and the lack of buildings that would not be in these terrains. The terrain is your enemy, whereas in Midnight Club, traffic and buildings are your enemy. You see what I mean? This is possibly how they were able to make both games at the same time and release them both, by the way, on the exact same day. That's right, October 26, 2000. Both these games came out on PS2 that day. Both of them. And funny enough, Midtown Madness 2 came out literally 1 month before that in September. 3 games in 2 months. That's something else. They came out with 3 games in 2 months. That's insane. You can see why people don't really mix them up. One is about smugglers while the other one is about street racing. But when you lift up the hood of the car, the engines look almost identical. They look like they have different executions, but in actuality, it just seems like a similar execution, but with a different coat of paint. That is the concept. The open world biomes, the smuggling, the street racing, the buildings. Surprisingly, you'd maybe only expect one of these games to be successful with them both releasing on the same day. But with Angel Studios, all things are possible because they both were critical hits and received sequels. This is possibly not reaching the sales that Rockstar wanted, but this is before Grand Theft Auto 3, so I don't think they were expecting much from this. At this point, Rockstar North and Rockstar Games were mostly focused on Grand Theft Auto 3, which will be releasing in 2001, just 1 year later. In my own personal diagnosis, I do not think that Rockstar headquarters and Rockstar North were keeping that much of an eye on Angel Studios during the production. They didn't really even bother promoting Midnight Club either. This is part of the reason as to to why Midnight Club was never really a go-to racing franchise for me and many others. Take-Two probably just didn't really view it as an asset in the beginning, and by the time it was actually successful, they didn't feel a need to market it anymore. The game barely received trailers and barely received press to hype up its release. And this is also probably because it was before Grand Theft Auto 3, which was the game that launched Rockstar through the atmosphere into becoming the massive publisher that it is today. The games had trailers, but they were not promoted on TV or in stores often, especially the entries after Midnight Club 1. Some of the entries in this franchise, though, were outselling Burnout Games, which is a known racing franchise, and I think that's what caused Take-Two to become stingy with giving out handouts for marketing. Their thought process was, if Burnout is going to win sales by over-marketing, then Midnight Club is going to outsell them next year through word of mouth. That was kind of the tactic, and it had some repercussions in terms of memorability of Midnight Club, but the games were very successful due to their great publicity campaign caused by public word. They were not always successful, but they became very successful. Take-Two probably also thought that Angel Studios couldn't be a big investment for them unless they could prove themselves as a developer by making a successful game franchise with very limited marketing. They already had GTA and Rockstar North, their trusted developer, hoping to make a big-time franchise with GTA. So basically, yes, Midnight Club was promoted off of word of mouth, and so were its sequels, but also it was the same reason that as a kid I had never even heard about it or cared. I was too busy playing Zapper, the dumbass cricket game on GameCube, than to be able to spend time playing a racing game like Midnight Club. Who's to say that if they marketed the games more, that they would have been more successful and more popular with my generation, who was growing up in the prime time of racing games' existence in the early 2000s. Midnight Club 1 had 2 TV ads and 1 major trailer, but the lack of marketing would be a possible contributing factor as to the deterioration of Midnight Club as a series, and one of the reasons for its possible extinction as an IP. An IP that began with Midnight Club Street Racing's soft launch at E3 2000. Midnight Club 1 sold around 1.5 million copies, which is a fraction of the 18 million copies that the series has sold as a whole. The word of mouth for the game stemmed from its standout concepts and unique ideas that made it different from any other racer at the time. Remember, this was 2000s. We're getting to the height of racing games as a whole, and Midnight Club stood out. It also didn't have a lot of competition for itself in 2000. The competition just wasn't very stiff, and I believe this might have helped out Midnight Club with sticking the landing. Its only competition was Driver 2, Ford Racing, and Need for Speed Sonic Unleashed. Like, come on. There were still thousands of other racing games, but the quality that Midnight Club brought to the table only had competitions with these 3 titles in 2000. And I'm going to emphasize why this is the height of racing games, because you may be batting an eye to that, but let's take a look at some numbers, because I am here to prove that statement in case you disagree. Need for Speed Most Wanted sold around 16 million copies, and Underground sold around 15 million worldwide as well. Nowadays, a critically acclaimed Need for Speed game like Heat has sold barely 4 million copies, and Payback, a far inferior game, sold a little bit over 4 million as well. Gran Turismo 3 sold around 15 million copies, whereas Gran Turismo 6 has sold only around 5 million. And the numbers weren't even released yet for Gran Turismo 7. Almost every title that's on the top 20 highest selling racing games is made before 2010 if we remove Mario Kart from the equation, because it makes no sense. Mario Kart, it is a racing game, but it's always going to be great, and on top of that, it's complete, we're not doing that. Nobody's sitting around saying, do you play racing games? And the first thing that pops in their head is Mario Kart. I'm sorry, Mario, you're an exception that proves the rule. The amount of racing titles that were released in 2000 was 107 games. Not just games as a whole, racing games. I will cut this in half just to get rid of all like the small racing titles that came out just to test out to see if they would work or not, but we still have 53 racing games here. That is still nearly 5 times the amount of the 11 higher budget racing titles that were released in 2023. Racing games were just that big in the 2000s. I mean that. That is not a nostalgia thing. Decades always have game trends, and one of the big ones of the 2000s was racing titles and extreme sports titles. But Midnight Club was able to stand out amongst these 107 other titles because of its concepts, because of its non-linear checkpoint system. Midnight Club started with you spawning in as a taxi driver, and you'd have to prove yourself to the street racers of the world. This might not sound unique, but one of the unique concepts that's brought up is that you started by finding the racers in the open world, catching up to them and chasing them all the way to the start of the race, which that was different. If you lost them before reaching the start of the race, well, too bad for you, but that was always how you started a level. You had to follow the racer there in the open world, and it made everything in the open city feel seamless. You drive to the racer, then drive to the starting position of the race, and now you do the actual race. Speaking of these races, these were all made possible through Angel Studios' game engine, which was obviously created by Angel Studios. And it was an engine that they used all the way up until Midnight Club 3 Dub Edition. They were a very tech-oriented organization, and they could build all their own assets for these racing titles. Sam Houser and Dan Houser, who are the founders of Rockstar Games, had a great admiration for this company because of that. Sam Houser has stated his initial love for Angel Studios, which probably stems from not only the success of Midnight Club, but also the ideology of always wanting to show off what the future of games can look like, what it can look like through their engines, through their previous titles, and through their roots in CGI animation. The future of art. Rockstar headquarters and Sam and Dan Houser believed so much in Angel Studios that they trusted them with creating their 7th generation engine known as Rage, but we'll come back to that for Midnight Club LA. They also trusted Midnight Club so much that instead of putting their money towards marketing, they put it towards shutting down New York Times Square to just get a shot of the front cover for this new IP. They could have gone the lazy route with the front cover of Midnight Club Street Racing, but they quite literally went to Times Square to get this picture. That is crazy that they did that they were willing to shut down Times Square just to get the front cover of this game. Rockstar was sweetening their trust in Angel Studios, sweetening that partnership. Was all that for Angel Studios though? Or was some of it for whenever they pull out a checkbook, Angel Studios would just say yes to being sold? Sweetening the deal and giving Angel Studios a little bit of foreplay before the actual purchase. We're gonna talk about that after my Midnight Club 1 review. I call Midnight Club one of the best racers that nobody has ever played. That doesn't mean it started that way. It has a 78 on Metacritic, but some reviews go as low as 5 out of 10s, which I would not agree with anything that low, but Midnight Club 1 is the worst of the series by a lot. It's a V4 engine, whereas every other title is a V8, but this is also appreciation culture. So naturally, with everything, we are going to start with what we appreciate from the beginning of this franchise. You start the game off as the taxi driver. You challenge racers immediately out the gate, and in the first race, which you are going to get demolished because you will never drive anything worse in your life than this piece of shit taxi at the start of the game. Most Midnight Club games have a difficulty spike about midway through. Midnight Club 1 makes a point from the get-go that this game is going to be hard, and if you're not ready, be prepared to just lose and not unlock one of these gorgeous knockoff vehicles. The unlicensed cars you unlock in Midnight 1 and 2 would give off this charm of having the knockoff movie vibe, like a child owning Giant Evil Shark on DVD versus your next door neighbor that owns Jaws. Having knockoff toys like Big Mean Gorilla, whereas your best friend named Need for Speed in 5th grade has a licensed King Kong action figure. You own Big Mean Gorilla. Midnight Club has Volucci, rather than having an actual Celine S7. Instead of having a Porsche, you'd have an Armada. And through these knockoff cars, you would have 3 different variants as well. Each one could be identified easily with their own color. They also tell you the weight and a bunch of useless information about the vehicle that does not matter. The important stuff was that you could change that color if you felt like it, but each model of the car had different specs, with the first model you unlock always being the worst of the bunch. They don't have really any differences outside of just paint job and stats. They don't have any modifications or cool looking exteriors, just color, stats, and occasionally the amount of nitrous tanks you have in the vehicle, but that barely makes a difference anyway. Funny enough, the unlicensed cars give off the same uncanny knockoff feeling to them that Midnight Club would have had just as a racing video game in 2000. If you were a kid talking to another kid who owned Burnout, who owned Gran Turismo, and you told them you owned Midnight Club, it would just feel like it was a knockoff. It doesn't mean that these cars or Midnight Club are worse than the mainstream, but it would just give that uncanny vibe that only something not from a known brand would give. The unlicensed cars would be a byproduct of an up-and-coming studio that either couldn't afford the vehicle licenses or more likely wanted pedestrian casualties during races, and that's something that no car company was going to sign on for. No car company was going to sign on to have their cars in a game where you could run over pedestrians at all. They wanted nothing to do with their brand actively running over people. But that's where I kind of have some respect for Midnight Club 1 and 2, and Angel Studios as a whole. It's in their ballsy nature to just do what they want to do, even if that means they can't get the licenses. They could have gone the crazy taxi route where no matter who you're trying to run over, they just jump out of the way. But no, Midnight Club just wanted you to be able to kill people casually while racing, and that's ballsy. Ballsiness is how Midnight Club redeems itself. What Midnight Club would lack in customization, they would make up for in unique ideas that made it stand out to the adult gamers and not the kid gamers like me who had Need for Speed brain rot. It was that beautiful open racing level concept. You had checkpoints that you had to hit when winning a race, but these checkpoints could either be reached through a non-linear approach, or you could take advantage of a shortcut to get to one of the checkpoints before somebody else did, or you would have to go some oddball way to see if you can get to one checkpoint faster than the other. There was never one specific path. It didn't have that autocross race feel that most other street racers had at the time. Like, sometimes the races would even let you go and hit whatever checkpoint you want in whatever order. What that means is that you could see what was the fastest pathway and explore the map to find the best possible pathway to completing a race. You would see 20-something checkpoints on the map, and now there's hundreds of options for how you could win this race. Now this is a fantastic concept, the original things that make Midnight Club stand out as it is. But just like a car that has a top speed that seems too good to be true, this concept had very rough handling in Midnight Club 1. A fantastic concept that expanded off of their Midtown Madness series, but a concept that would be so hard to fully realize in their first title when they had 3 racing games coming out within 2 months. In other words, it's super flawed, which is going to be my first comment moving into the negative portion of Midnight Club 1. To execute what Midnight Club Street Racing wants to do is so difficult, and there's really a few hiccups that keep it from being great. I love the idea of traffic being your enemy. I love the idea of the racing game that lets you run over pedestrians, which most other racing games never let you do. God damn, I sound like a psycho. One thing that makes this game fall so much from grace from being that World Cup winner, it's the AI. The game promotes itself on this idea of exploring to figure out what's the best possible path through this checkpoint route system, but it very rarely feels like you are ever going to find a better way to complete a race than just trailing behind the first place AI. Might I add, the very obvious first place AI, because they literally put a red marker over the main enemy racer. Normally the main racer you are fighting is 90% of the time going to be the one to win the race, and trailing behind them and trying to pass him is going to be easier and more efficient than going down the freaking yellow brick road to try and find another path. This AI makes the game basically the Dark Souls of racing games, and no, that is not a good thing for this racing game. It has zero forgiveness. If you crash, restart. There's no point in even trying to catch up. People say that in this game it's all about trial and error, but I would actually disagree with that in some circumstances. The nitrous barely does anything. They make it seem like that would be like a way to get yourself out of a bad situation, maybe after you make a mistake, but it doesn't. It literally speeds you up 10% faster probably for just a few seconds. I pulled 10% out of my ass, but I'm gonna be honest with you, it does not do jack crap. You will never win a race on the first try, and I don't mind the idea of a trial and error racing game, but as I said, this game is not that all the time. The game can get so difficult at times that all you're doing is trailing the first place bot and praying they hit a car or a wall. You're praying for an RNG outcome to just be able to win. This is not fun, and it's not even strategic. This is nothing. This is brain dead driving in hopes for RNG to come by and save the day like Superman. This methodology of trailing behind the main bad guy AI, who they make obvious with that red marker on their head, often feels like the game is just actively going against its exploration model. The AI will know all the shortcuts, they'll know the best possible route, and therefore trial and error by following them is just the best method of playing. Because likely, not always, and I do know there's probably some super meta way of being able to beat every race, but likely there is no faster way than the one they are taking, and if there is, it would take a lot longer to find it than it would just to follow them repeatedly until you finally surpass them. Once again, It's an amazing concept, but the execution doesn't land because the AI is too stiff and knows exactly where to go for every race. If you make one mistake, just restart. All hope is lost, and that can be so frustrating. And it's so frustrating, especially in a game that revs about its shortcut system, its explorative environment, and non-linear checkpoint system. Nope. If you get behind, just quit. You will always lose if you ever get behind. If you ever make a mistake, you will just lose. Let me clarify something too. The AI is not smart. They are as simple gets, and that's why the game is so freaking hard. They will drive in an extremely specific path, but it's a path with most of the shortcuts, maybe not all of them, but it almost guarantees that they will get first place. But it's not smart. And on the off chance that their simplicity causes them to crash due to RNG, you will be screaming hallelujah as you pass the finish line in first place. Some races are rougher than others. Sometimes you have a higher stat car where you can surpass the first place enemy fairly quickly, but often the races will be trial and error of trailing an enemy vehicle, and this is only the beginning. Most Midnight Club games have a difficulty spike in the middle of the game, whereas Midnight Club 1 from the get-go is hard, and it only gets harder when you get to the second city. Yep, there's 2 cities in this game, London and New York. There were originally going to be 3, with Tokyo being the 3rd, but they didn't have development time to add it. So now whenever you're playing in New York, you'll be smashing your controller against a desk, but when you're in London, you'll be smashing your controller against a table of tea and crumpets, because it does not care if you lose a countless amount of times before winning. I don't even know how much time they even had on these maps, especially the second map, because the London map is nearly identical to the London map in Midtown Madness 2. So no wonder they were able to release 3 games within 2 months. If anything, it seems that Midnight Club Street Racing actually got the least amount of attention during the development of all 3 of these games. And it's not that really it's that bad once you get used to the trial and error system, but it's just that it feels like such an extremely difficult generic racer rather than the explorative non-linear racer that it was trying to promote itself as. I say it's like the Dark Souls, but Dark Souls is about memorizing the telegraphs, the patterns, and the attacks of your opponent. You are constantly thinking. Whereas Midnight Club, the trial and error comes from dodging traffic, which is very intuitive, by the way. This is the best part about the racing in general. But the other part of that trial and error is just trying to get around the guy that's in first place. And the third massive part of it is literally just luck, which is not trial and error. That's very occasionally, it is just luck. It's just waiting for some insanely stupid shit to happen like this. At times when playing this game, I loved striving for perfection against some of the racers, even if it meant restarting the race upwards to 20 times. But then there would be every few races where it would just become beyond frustrating due to how restrictive the experience is. The restrictiveness in a game that wants you to be an unrestricted racer. That is my main frustration. The game isn't made to just be trailing trial and error game, and that's obvious. It presents itself as something that it really isn't, but hey, I guess it's appropriate if Midnight Club is trying to be a car salesman. And that's exactly what Midnight Club 1 is. It prepares you for a lifetime of difficulty. It's a good car. They sold you a good car, but it's not the one the car salesman promised you. It wasn't a bad experience with the car, but it just feels like an extremely difficult racing game with a couple of occasionally interesting concepts that you can barely take advantage of. There's a mode called cruise mode, and going around New York City or London, just driving around, it gives off chill vibes. It gives off the drinking a beer while driving in a video game on the weekend vibes. The cruise mode just gives off no stress vibes, which is great because you know if you drank a beer while racing in this game, you'd die from dehydration because sweat bullets would just be pelting down your face at the speed of light. The more you're in cruise mode though, and this is where the problems come up again, is that you start to notice that the maps don't really have a lot to them either, regardless of how relaxing they are. There aren't as many shortcuts as they lead on, feeling like there's less than 25 on each map, which isn't a lot considering how big these maps are. And it ultimately makes the exploration, even if it wasn't hindered by the AI, it makes it feel unsatisfying because there's just not that many paths to explore and not much variety to the environment. But if there's one thing these environments do get right, and you'll notice this when driving around, it will catch your eye, it's how much they can fit on the screen. This goes along with you having to dodge traffic, the skyscrapers that you're having to avoid crashing into, the pedestrians of the game that you can run over. And sure, the game is not the best looking, especially from texture pop-ins that are caused by view distance, but that view distance that causes those pop-ins is only due to the amount they are trying to fit on the screen, and to me that is a totally suitable compromise. It's a game that wanted to be more impressive on a technological level rather than a graphical level, which is fine by me, especially because the average racer only cares about the graphical level and not the technological level. It also fits better with Angel Studios' motto of the future of art mindset, be pushing the technological boundaries, not pushing necessarily the graphical boundaries. Basically what I'm trying to say is it doesn't look as good as something like Ford Racing or Need for Speed, but it has a hell of a lot more going on than those games. The only thing graphically that ever really annoyed me was that the nitrous will send you into this filter mode that makes it look like you're going so much more faster than you actually are, because as I said before, the nitrous just doesn't really do anything for you. And this just seems like an artistic choice that was made, but it kind of lends itself to being deceiving because you just really aren't going that fast. There's a lot of odd quality of life choices though that are just piss poor. Like if you want to change a vehicle for a race, you have to back out of the race, change vehicles, go back into cruise mode, find the racer again, follow him to the race again, and then start the race all over again. It's a pain in the ass. Just let me change my vehicle. Driving through the impressive environments that are littered with Rockstar Games advertising is only so enjoyable with as many issues as this game presents. It's one I raced through one time, and it's not one that I would ever pick up again after I beat it. Midnight Club Street Racing is the start to one of the best racing franchises ever, but it could have been one of the best racers as a singular game if the AI was sorted out and if there was a little more to actually find within the city itself. Genuinely, the AI can create intense races, which is a positive, but it is way too simple and bogs down the concept of the game entirely, nearly wasting the non-linearity of the checkpoint system that's supposedly promoted by the developers through game modes like where you can get every checkpoint in whatever order you want. I love how wacky the crashing can get. The dodging traffic is by far the best part about the game. It is the most intense part about the game, and I do love and respect the difficulty. I just wish the difficulty was placed in the environments and the exploration rather than the main AI being so dumbed down that they just know nearly the perfect pathway in almost every single race. The difficulty is there. I respect that, but I just think it's misplaced. It's interesting to hear so many people complain about the difficulty in the future entries of this series, because I would argue that Midnight Club 1 is by far the hardest. Maybe it's because it's the first one I played, but I would argue this one is freaking ridiculous compared to the later entries. Sure, the other entries might have some harder racetracks, they might have smarter AI at times, but they were always more forgiving if you messed up with the abilities that they'll give you later on. Midnight Club 1 was the only game in the entire series where I felt like that if I messed up even one time, it was game over. There's no point. This is not my favorite game. I think that's very obvious. Driving through the impressive environments that are littered with Rockstar Games advertising is only as enjoyable as it can be with as many issues as this game has. That to me became more infuriating than anything else in the entire game, and I know that some masochistic Midnight Club 1 enthusiast, it's the main reason why they flock back to the game in the first place, but I just don't enjoy that. Midnight Club 1 is the most RNG based of the series, and it gets the title for being the hardest game in the series for me. Midnight Club 1 helped format some of the cores of the Midnight Club franchise, with nighttime races being a must. No daytime until we get to Midnight Club 3. The useless cops that do absolutely nothing, a commonplace trait in Midnight Club games for nearly the entire series. I mean it. I don't bring them up in this video hardly hardly ever because they really don't do anything until much later in this franchise. But also Midnight Club 1, while creating all these traits, also paved the way for having some of the best music in any racer ever. The techno soundtrack was pushed by Rockstar's co-founder Terry Donovan. Terry heavily pushed for a techno soundtrack that he didn't just want it to be licensed music that other racers had. He instead wanted the techno soundtrack to create a tone and an identity for Midnight Club, and it's one of the only consistent things for the entire franchise. The music was created by a few different artists, one named Derek May, one named Surgeon, and the other one Dom and Roland, who they all teamed up with Rockstar to create this magnificent soundtrack. They are not carried over into Midnight Club 2, but Midnight Club 1 will be remembered for the bangers that started the path that this series is set to take musically. Oh yeah, and by the way, there's also a Game Boy version of Midnight Club 1. It was developed by Rebellion, who creates the Sniper Elite games. So how's Midnight Club 1 for Game Boy? Midnight Club 2. After the success of its predecessor in Smuggler's Run 1, Angel Studios quickly began work on sequels to both of these while also working on early concepts for a Western game known as Red Dead Revolver. Due to their rising success, Microsoft and Activision were even trying to purchase their studio, but after one sit down with the owner of Angel Studios and Sam and Dan Houser, that brotherhood of co-founders, they had a few glasses of tequila, their favorite choice of alcohol. Tequila won, and Diego Angel decided to sell Angel Studios to Rockstar, and now their name was going to be Rockstar San Diego from 2003 onward. Their studio nearly doubled in employee size, which allowed for Angel Studios, now known as Rockstar San Diego, to pump out games at light speed. Smuggler's Run 2 and 3 would release annually after the first game. Red Dead Revolver would be in the pipeline, but they took their sweet time on Midnight Club 2, which released April 8th, 2003 in North America, nearly 3 years after the original, which was a long time for a game in the early 2000s. The game director appointed for Midnight Club 2 was close with Rockstar Games, after previously being the creative director on Smuggler's Run 2. His name was Stephen Olds, and now he was the newly promoted game director for Midnight Club 2. I mention his name only because Midnight Club 1 established itself as a franchise that was a half arcade and half grounded street racer, a non-linear arcadey sim racing game. And he completely changed the direction of Midnight Club with this specific game, and that's either going to be in a way that you'll either love or you're going to hate it. And in the beginning of this video, we listed multiple identities for racers across the board and how they have that consistency, and how the problem with Midnight Club is that there is barely a set identity outside of that checkpoint system, and that's because these games feel entirely different from the previous entry with every new one. There's a little bit of consistency between Midnight Club 3 and 2, but we'll get there when we get there. Rockstar now owns Angel Studios, and the new Rockstar San Diego would have to prove themselves as a studio that was just recently purchased. This is going to be my second reason as to why Midnight Club 5 never came out, and why Midnight Club slowly became that extinct IP to Rockstar. They were practically demanding Rockstar Games to create an IP that would outsell everything, something they could hype up, something like Grand Theft Auto. Because now we are in a post-GTA 3 world, and every GTA game was making charts as the highest selling game of the year. My own personal theory: Take-Two and Rockstar Games didn't have trust in Midnight Club, even with its success. They wanted another GTA. They didn't have trust in San Diego's other property known as Red Dead Revolver in 2004 either. And to me, this is backed up by Rockstar San Diego being asked by Rockstar Games to make a new IP called Agent. Do y'all remember Agent? Holy shit, that was so long ago. This game made headlines everywhere as a new IP from Rockstar North in 2009, but way before that, it was supposed to be made by the Red Dead Revolver and Midnight Club creators, Rockstar San Diego. And this is all coming from this Polygon article called The Agent Before Agent, written by Blake Hester. It was going to be a spy game that was going to utilize open sandbox elements, open levels, and non-linear ways of figuring out how to finish a mission to create this legendary espionage experience. According to the former employees that are mentioned in the article, Sam and Dan Houser apparently did not treat the company the same way that Diego Angel did. They were harsher, expected way more employee commitment even with a massive influx of new employees, and wanted them to start immediately on pre-production for this new spy game that was originally going to be on PS2 and the original Xbox hardware. It was an awkward transition for Rockstar San Diego to say the least, with new bosses, new employees, and now a new IP being plopped on them. This new IP, this new spy IP, was going to be the proof that Rockstar needed to justify their purchasing of Angel Studios. This was going to be the next big Rockstar IP. Not these other IPs that Angel Studios brought to the table with Red Dead Revolver or Midnight Club. And Midnight Club was successful, but it was not Grand Theft Auto every year making the highest selling game successful. It was said that Rockstar Games as a whole was pushing them to their brink, forcing long work hours, and when their previous boss would let them have a week or two off after a game launch, which was rewarding them for working overtime, Rockstar would want them to come back immediately and crunch out the next project even if it was a weekend. People were leaving the company due to this new leadership. Even Louis Gigliotti, who was the head producer on the Spy project, he even left the company. Over 10 other employees joined him in leaving, and they formed a studio called Concrete Games. A couple of people literally died in this interval of time who worked with the company as well. They couldn't find leaders quick enough to replace those who were leaving, and the game agent just wasn't coming out to look the same way that Sam Houser envisioned it looking. He was the head co-founder, the executive producer on everything, and if he didn't like it, it didn't stay. Rockstar North soon took over the project after the last Midnight Club game came out, and all the assets for the Agent project that San Diego was working on, all of those assets were moved to Red Dead Redemption. So you may be asking yourself, what does this have to do with Midnight Club? Well, Rockstar San Diego was already in the process of creating a Midnight Club 5, but after the massive success of Red Dead Redemption, that was the proof that Rockstar wanted from San Diego with Agent. That was highest selling game material. Rockstar North is attached to Grand Theft Auto, and Rockstar San Diego is going to become synonymous with that being attached to Red Dead Redemption. The final nail in the coffin on these games like Midnight Club 5 or Bully 2 was when Leslie Benzies, who was one of the former presidents at Rockstar North, decided to leave the company in the mid-2010s. This caused Sam, Dan, the co-founders, and a few leaders left behind to batten down the hatches and just focus on GTA Online, Red Dead 2, and GTA 6. Quite a few employees left with Leslie Benzies as well, and those employees were mainly in charge of the single-player DLC content for GTA 5. So that never came to fruition. Bully 2 never came to fruition. And therefore, Midnight Club 5 never came to fruition. This just had a ripple effect throughout the company to get all the employees focused on the same projects because they didn't have leadership to handle the stress of different IPs. That is my own personal speculation, but I do believe that to be true. There's so many Rockstar studios, so at this point they just needed all of them to focus on one thing. Leslie wanted to focus more on the online elements of these games, and Rockstar just didn't want to do that. The rest of the co-founders didn't want to do that, but it's a little bit ironic because they literally dropped all of the single player focused games and only picked games where they could have a live service element to it. This was the only reason I could find for him leaving the company, but based on how Rockstar's been in the recent decade, I don't know if their priorities are still on creating just single player games and not focusing on the online as well. This is my third big reason, along with the lack of trust in marketing, for the nail in the coffin to the great Midnight Club series. It got buried with all the other IPs that disappeared after Rockstar San Diego proved themselves with Red Dead, after all that leadership left, and after all of these labor problems that they were encountering with different studios in the late 2000s and early 2010s. We all love Red Dead Redemption. We all love Grand Theft Auto, but Rockstar San Diego proved themselves long ago in my opinion because I fucking love Midnight Club 2. Midnight Club 2 is a complete overhaul to the first game that was overseen by game director Stephen Olds, who funny enough is now on the art team with Bungie on Destiny 2. Midnight Club 1, which I would argue is the hardest game in the series by a decently large margin, Midnight Club 2 feels significantly easier out the gate for at least the first few races. The methodology behind creating Midnight Club 2 that Stephen Olds must have had in his head was to make the game easier in the beginning, but make the middle of the game have a massive difficulty spike. That would become commonplace for Midnight Club games after the second entry. The first city was always the easiest, and then there's just a huge jump in difficulty versus the first game where it feels like you're riding a freaking bicycle against these racers. My first impression of Midnight Club 2 was, wow, so this just expands off Midnight Club 1, makes some quality of life improvements. Oh, that's cool, that's cool. Now I can immediately start up the next race with the racers. Oh, that's nice, that's nice. They're slower in the city whenever you're chasing them to the start of the race, which that makes it a little bit easier. Oh, that's kind of nice. And I can change a car without going back into cruise mode. Oh, this is nice quality of life. That's awesome, but is it just improvements or is there anything actually oh my god. My guy is flying off rooftops. When I say the game director of Rockstar San Diego completely did a reversal of this franchise, I mean it. The first game was goofy but grounded in its arcade sim style. This game is just an extreme sports game where you are driving on buildings flying around the map, and the map itself has hundreds of shortcuts this time around. Even the level designer Mark Fredrickson said in a journal that while other games were focused on recreating cities to be realistic, Midnight Club 2 was focused on using the city as a template, but making the racetrack the main focus. He states that at 180 miles per hour, it's all a blur anyway, so who cares if it's recreated exactly the way it looks in real life? Who cares? And it will even be a harsher departure when we get to the later Midnight Club games. These levels accommodate the psychopathic driver that I want to be on the roads. They're wider, there's clearer shortcuts, and there's so many pedestrians that fly into the air ragdoll style that the game is practically begging for you to run them over. Quite literally, I swear they make this shit funny on purpose. Hey, wait a second, this is the GTA 5 map. I've been here. The first city you unlock is San Andreas. LA is your training ground. The races here are not very hard, and you will be out fairly quickly. Paris is not laid out in like a grid fashion the way that LA is. You will have to learn these weird street patterns. There's no just like straight area. Like, it's all very strange looking at first. And then Tokyo is all about blasting as fast as you can down wide, long roads. Paris and Tokyo are significantly harder than LA, so just be prepared. LA is not the difficulty that you should be expecting for later on. LA is fairly easy. And then when you get to Paris, the streets just become weird and all over the place. And then Tokyo, the racers are just so freaking fast. Each one of these cities took them 6 months to develop and to build, with over 8,000 destructible props each. And even though I couldn't find out how long development was on Midnight Club 1, I can almost guarantee that this was longer. There's no way. Over 2 years of production, making city designs for about half of it, and then making the driving for the cars make Tony Hawk Pro Skater look like real skateboarding with how ridiculous it gets. More design choices were made to follow suit with this over-the-top mindset that Midnight Club 2 threw around so casually in its game. Midnight Club 2 follows suit by having actual CGI cutscenes before races that show off the enemy racer and what they look like, and 90% of the time they're just a stereotype, which goes along with how over-the-top this game is. I will be honest, this has not aged well for many people, but I will say that it does match the over-the-top factor of the video game. I understand the controversial elements of it and why they are controversial. Although I feel like this game is laughing about how ridiculous these stereotypes are, like one of the first enemies who calls you an underprivileged freak, which is very tongue-in-cheek. Sure, it's all riding a line, but then when you get to Tokyo, that's when you realize it gets a little bit awkward.
You race with honor and show the respect to the end. Your resume is not required. Take the car and stay away!
Yeah, I love the character CGI screens, but not some of them. When it's not those, I kinda love them because they do bring that over-the-top value to the next level in an already extremely silly video game. But as I said earlier, most of the archetypes are fairly inconsequential, like the French dude who hates Americans.
Okay, man, I race you for a hamburger.
Like, I'm sorry, but that's kind of funny. Everything about this game is ridiculous, from the character screens to the extreme sports mentality with the cars, the physics with running over pedestrians, and the races, which are equally insane to everything I just listed. An early decision made in development for this game was that there be no invisible walls, which was a decision to sport the non-linear racing concept that was idealized in the first game. Probably the only trait in Midnight Club that has had any form of consistency is that non-linear checkpoint system. Every surface though, every roof, and every shortcut could be used to get to those checkpoints that are scattered across the city in Midnight Club 2. These same exact invisible walls in the games could be exploited by using glitches, figuring out workarounds for races, with this being the buggiest game in the series. But also, all of this made the game a hell of a lot more fun than its predecessor, which that could be my review of MC2, but I will actually elaborate. They got to bring 3 cities this time around, including the cut city from Midnight Club 1 with Tokyo, but unfortunately, the only cut content that also suffered here was the customization again. It's still just different models of the same car, and then the color of the model that you can change. There's barely any customization, and Midnight Club 2 is lucky because the driving is so addictive that I barely even thought about the lack of customization. It was like eating movie theater popcorn. That shit ain't healthy, but I felt like I was just eating happy junk food whenever I was flying 100 feet off a ramp and landing all over my opponents just 5 seconds before the end of a race while smashing through 20 families on the sidewalk. Speaking of running over people, car licensing was still one of the biggest problems plaguing this game in terms of content that you wish was there. There's very few other issues, and I'll explain that when getting into my review portion. This game, unlike the previous one, doesn't force you to play follow the leader whenever you are racing, but instead supports you doing the race in your own way, figuring out shortcuts, especially because there are so many damn shortcuts on the map, and the game actively wants you to experiment. Sometimes I'd follow the leader, sometimes I'd follow another pack of cars who were likely to win against the main enemy, or sometimes I'd just say fuck it and form my own path. The head enemy doesn't know every shortcut now. The AI is not made that simplistic, not perfect pathing, so now you can always find ways to surpass them on the track. The game has a burnout system that if you do one of these burnouts, you can charge up your own nitrous. There's also other ways to charge up your nitrous, like if you're behind the leader when racing, you can either tailgate behind them or other racers and charge up your nitrous via just the tailgating. This is just a fantastic addition because it prevents you from falling into the Midnight Club 1 mentality of just, oh well, I crashed, who cares, I'm restarting, whatever. Which this mentality sucks, because the game should not be relying on absolute perfection. This game does allow for some errors. It's like in Mario Kart, the further you are behind, the more likely you are to get a bullet bill. In Midnight Club 2, if you are in first place, there's no possible way for you to get a nitrous from tailgating because there is no racer to tailgate. The game improved upon so much, but it also had all the competition in the world pushing against it, unlike its predecessor. Midnight Club 2 could stand out against them due to supporting the non-linearity of the first game by having no invisible walls, the pedestrians that could be sadistically run over, and the difficulty that has a massive spike in the midpoint of the game, making it much harder than the average racer in 2003. There was also a racetrack editor this time around that was inspired off of the Pro Skater skate park makers, and don't get me wrong, it was heavily simplified, but this was the first iteration foreshadowing the improvements that you would see in future titles. It's still a trial and error game, just like the first one, but it feels like a trial and error game that the first one wanted to be. If you miss a faster path to complete your race, if you messed up repeatedly and not just once, if you don't dodge traffic well enough over and over and over again, it's not just one mistake, and it's not just messing up on mimicking every movement that your first place enemy does. It's mistakes that are accumulated over time, and it's mistakes in not figuring out the best path or constantly hitting traffic. It also separated itself from the other racers of the time due to the game receiving a heap of controversy over its extreme over-the-top gameplay versus the first game, but definitely controversial in regards to the character cutscenes of its over-the-top caricatures. I traveled to Paris, and the first dude to greet me is this guy.
What a mug. Bleeding yank, all the same. Come on, my son. Think you're something special?
First racer I fought in the game looked like Gusteau from Ratatouille.
Look at this little shrimp. Where does he think he is kidding posing like that? think you can race me in that car?
And then, when you get to Japan, you already know what happens. All of these enemies make jabs at you during the race. They make comments, some are hilarious, some are just mean, and normally they don't repeat themselves nearly as often as they did in the first game, because whenever they would insult you in the first game, they would just say the same 3 lines over and over, whereas in this one, you don't often hear repeats.
Don't make me say Moses, I have seen God. He weighs 280 pounds.
Yeah, like that quote. Thanks for the example, guy.
Dude, this underprivileged freak is...
Oh no.
La ville de Paris is not big enough for the two of us.
Oh no, this can become a thing. I thought I'd like MC1 more when I started MC2 because it seemed too easy at the start, but I slowly realized, and this will happen to you as well, that if you go into the game thinking, oh, this is a little bit too easy for me, the game has a 90-degree difficulty spike after the first city, which will become common in these games, so you better expect it with every entry from here on out. And to me, this is far better due to easing you into the difficulty rather than just having it outright be the hardest game ever. Nowadays, it's just easy and then it becomes the hardest game ever. It's not just the hardest game ever from start to finish. Not that I'm against a game being the hardest game ever, but where is that difficulty placed? Is it actually in trial and error, or is it in bullshit AI pathing? The fact that you can catch up to the racers in this game and you don't have to immediately restart after you mess up is just such a welcome addition to this game. It's such a welcomed improvement. Really, the only difficulty that can feel a little unfair is a couple of the races, specifically towards the latter half of Paris and Tokyo. And the only other thing is the weather can feel a little bit against you because the fog and the rain, with already having bad texture pop-in issues, it can make you feel like that, you know, it's just another obstacle in your vision on top of how long it takes you to notice a vehicle that's about to have a head-on collision with you. It's already tough enough to notice that head-on collision with the texture pop-in. Now add rain and fog effects and it just becomes even more difficult, which that can feel a little bit unfair at times. Well, and the problem isn't necessarily like the weather, but it's the fact that it's far harder for you to see and yet your opponents still have the same perfect sight they have during the entire race. This is such a minor complaint though, because most of the time the reasons you fail are completely fair. And I say most of the time because I am going to talk about the couple times where it's not fair. Traffic is still a major obstacle in this game, but now, and I can show you proof of this, that now they target you at times with scripted moments to specifically get in your way in the most obnoxious way possible. Like, they'll do a scripted moment that would be impossible for you to react on your first time playing a race. So instead of it feeling intense, it just feels like BS and it leads to frustration. These scripted traffic moments target you. I can't stand these. There's too few and far between for it to be that big of a deal to me, but it's like your favorite pizza and somebody throws pineapple on it. Like, I'm taking that shit off, dude. You underprivileged freaks can stick to your pineapple, you fucking weirdos. Why would you eat pineapple? The wacky tobacco way that this game presents its races is something that I will miss dearly in the next 2 entries, because I loved running over people and even seeing other racers just casually run over a group of people with no reaction from the police. Because, as always, the police are completely useless, just like how they are in Midnight Club 1. They might not have improved the police AI, but they do make plenty of quality of life improvements to the auto starting up the next race with the same racer, unlike the first game, and the changing your car rather than having to change and then go back to the start of the race all over again. Now you can just lose at a race, decide you want to change your car, and immediately restart the race. I'm not necessarily saying either that these reasons are why I love the game, because these are just basic necessities for a racing title. Don't make it really annoying to change these things, or to start the next race immediately. These are quality of life aspects that, if removed, would become a problem, but when they are present, they are just the necessity that is needed in the game. So I'm not going to sit here and sing the game's praises because it has things that are basic necessities in a racing game. I'm just happy they're there. This is an improvement, but this is not the reason why I love Midnight Club 2. I love Midnight Club 2 because it takes the concepts of Midnight Club 1, throws the groundedness out the window, removes all invisible walls to increase the non-linearity of reaching to these checkpoints, and in every possible way, it's better than the first game. I don't normally say that, but I'm being honest that in nearly every way this game is better. They still have unlicensed vehicles, but now they've added motorcycles that are stupid fast. At first I thought they were OP until I realized this. I suck at driving them. If you even gently crash in one of these things, you will fly off your motorcycle, and this is to counteract the speed of all the motorcycles in the game, so they are not actually OP. Because if this wasn't the case, they would be broken. There'd be no reason to ever use a car. You have to drive a motorcycle perfectly, but if you are able to, you can leave the rest of the competition eating your dust. For me though, I was too busy getting run over and squished by 18-wheelers, so I switched back to a wuss car. In my wuss car though, I realized that the game finds perfection in its insanity. The moments where you fly off a ramp over a building just because you got a nitrous boost from tailgating somebody during a race, and meanwhile the enemy racer is yelling at you in a horribly over-the-top accent. It's so fucking hilariously goofy, and it's such a juvenile blast. The burnout and nitrous system were great added features to never make you auto-quit a race even when you make a mistake. The cities feel formatted as racetracks rather than real cities, which I prefer for a game where your top speed is 250 miles per hour. Other features in the game like two-wheel driving are not necessary like tailgating, but the two-wheel drive can be mastered and become a show-off feature to your friends if you can use it seamlessly in a race. Pulling off these stunts can make it more likely to crash and cause your car to get damaged, but luckily, in this game, they make it a lot harder to blow up your car, which makes up for the fact that if you blow up your car, you lose a race, with the exception of the motorcycle, because you can crash that thing 60 times in the middle of a race. It's extremely hard to lose a race from blowing up. Probably happened to me one time in my entire playthrough. The key is to always stick with the first place drivers, but search for pathways that they may not notice. That means that you can drive ahead of them. The game doesn't make those enemies know everything, and therefore it rewards you by exploring and promotes you to know your track well enough, which was the point of concept in Midnight Club 1 that was never fully realized. The restrictiveness is what annoyed me so much about the first game, and this game threw it out the window. It would have been so much worse if I was driving off a ramp over a building, but all of a sudden I get hit by the infinite weight of an invisible wall created by a developer that just wanted to subtract my enjoyment from such a goofy ass game. Don't take my enjoyment. I won't let you do that. And yes, by the way, if you're wondering, the game is not flawless. Just because it's goofy, just because it finds perfection in that does not mean it's not flawed perfection. The customization does feel like a terribly missed opportunity in a year where every racer was taking advantage of customization options. Some of the races are way too long, like 5 minutes long, and I'm sorry, but I don't want my balls glued with sweat to my thigh for 5 minutes straight just for me to realize that I'm gonna lose a race by 0.45 milliseconds. It's ridiculous. I'm not doing that. That's too long for me. You can call me a pussy, call me a wuss, but it's just not my thing. The racing editor that I mentioned earlier is a cool addition, but it's definitely not fleshed out whatsoever, and the AI absolutely sucks on it, which means that if you're not playing it with a friend, it basically makes the racing editor superfluous. And while you had battle mode or modes like detonate where you had to carry a bomb to the finish line, or even capture the flag where you could do split screen with upwards to 4 friends, these modes just in general allowed for a lot of opportunity for mischief with split screen enjoyment. And there was also an online mode created for the game, but I obviously did not get to play that. But I felt like it was worth noting just considering that online was still a fairly new thing at the time for consoles. That 4-player split screen co-op though is more of a plus to me than anything related to the multiplayer aspect. You could drive around your non-licensed vehicles in one of the goofier racing games I've played in a while, and you can do it with 3 other people. You'll be driving around a Corvette, in Midnight Club 2 it's called Covettes. Really creative, guys. You can tell I love this game, and that's because it's an absolute charmer. It's like the James Bond of racing games, and it is the start of all the perfection that would come to Midnight Club after this as well. Midnight Club 2 gets my reward for being the goofiest and most over-the-top Midnight Club game in the series. I respect it. I get why people don't love it, but when you grew up with Burnout games, Need for Speed games, and all the extreme sports games of the early 2000s, it just clicks for you. It spoke to the kid in me who's grown up but has never forgotten how delightful it was to play one of these racers that nowadays would only exist in an arcade. Angel Studios separated the identity of Midnight Club with Midnight Club 2. This was their first step into all the inconsistencies that this franchise would have, but some of them just delightful inconsistencies. They kept the familiarity of Midnight Club 1 with the checkpoint system, but they added the insane feeling that every early 2000s piece of media was known for. We haven't reached the dark brooding era of the mid-2000s yet, and the only information in regard to MC2's sales was the 1.3 million copies it sold on PS2 according to frickin' Wikipedia. This didn't even surpass the 1.8 million copies that the original game sold on PS2, and even that game was already receiving awards like Best Game That You Didn't Play from GameSpot in the year 2000. So this begs the question, why did Midnight Club 2 not sell as well? It received critical praise across the board with the exception of Edge Gaming. They claimed that they didn't deviate enough from that to justify its existence, which yeah, but that's also the only consistency with Midnight Club that made it stand out as a racer in the first place. Complaining about it being too similar to Midtown Madness is a reasonable complaint, but are you understanding what Midnight Club is trying to accomplish? Or are you just complaining because they made a game that feels similar to the game that they previously made? Doom feels similar to Wolfenstein. Destiny feels similar to Halo. Resident Evil 4 feels similar to, well, Resident Evil 4. In the case of Midnight Club 2, it might not diverge in the case of the checkpoint system, but its divergence was still very prevalent, and it wasn't to change what makes Midnight Club stand out just to separate it from Midtown Madness, but it was to dial everything tonally up to 11. That's how they diverged from Midnight Club 1. It had nothing to do with trying to change the checkpoint system. They dialed everything up to 11 and they did it successfully. Not once in this review do they bring up the absurd tonal shift, and the only other thing that they're willing to bring up is how the checkpoint system is supposed to support exploration, but it also feels fairly obvious which path leads to victory. So why would you explore if you already can tell which path leads to victory? I want to talk about that because that's actually a valid point. I know, hold up, just let me speak. It's a valid point that the game still doesn't support its non-linear system well enough, even in MC2, but does that mean that it should be changed? Because let's look at the alternative, shall we? Let's create a hypothetical world where Midnight Club 2 doesn't have the shortcuts in clear sight. You can't see the obvious pathway, so now you're going to be supported to explore even more. Let's make it a world where these shortcuts are few and far between, and the only way to figure out the best pathing is repeatedly exploring and checking your map and constantly trying to figure out which way is the fastest. Would this give you the intense experience that Midnight Club also is trying to accomplish? No. You would spend the majority of your game not even racing, but just test trialing certain paths to see which would be the most ideal, or just staring at a map for 10 minutes trying to figure out which path is the best. You would just be constantly restarting your game in hopes to be able to find the best path, and once you do, you might get some intensity from it, you might get some intensity from finally winning, but the game stops being a racing game. It honestly would just become a train track simulation builder. Have you ever played one of those? You would create a track and see if it would hold a train. In Midnight Club, you would go down every pathway to see which will make the race best for your car, rather than just following a group of cars and then sometimes deviating from the norm and always utilizing the clear insight shortcuts. This makes for an intense, fast experience where you're thinking constantly on your feet while driving. That intense, fast experience that comes from just doing the race is 50% of Midnight Club, but because you can also try different paths, follow other cars if you try again, utilize shortcuts, or even occasionally completely break the norm, it still has the unique checkpoint system that is being taken advantage of through exploration, and that's the other 50% of MC2. 50% discovering unique pathways and even sometimes wholly taking an original path, and 50% fast, bonkers driving. That 50% of fast bonkers driving would be removed if the game did not have these clear insight shortcuts, did not have you follow, packs of cars to figure out what's the best possible way, because you would just be staring at a map 90% of your playthrough and then just trial and error, being able to try and figure out which path is the best on the map. This review also makes comments about how frame rate was prioritized over draw distances, and I can't for the life of me understand how this was even an argument when peak frame rates at the time were 30 frames per second. I would rather have this game run at 30 frames per second on console in 2003 than be subjugated to a lackluster beneath 20 frames per second just to be able to see a little farther. The fog and rain effects, sure, they can make the view distance a little bit worse, but they just aren't present enough in the game for me to really hate on the game that much for that. I can't imagine this review and these complaints being the reason for why Midnight Club 2 was not as successful as Midnight Club 1. The arcadey feeling just couldn't have been it because that was all over the place in the early 2000s. It couldn't have been the departure in tone from Midnight Club 1 because the game didn't have a strong enough fan base at that point yet. And now when I'm thinking back to the year of 2000, there wasn't a lot of competition for Midnight Club 1, and we already established there was way more in the year 2003. Midnight Club 2 had to compete with Burnout 2, Need for Speed Underground, Mario Kart Double Dash, and F-Zero GX. When customers were going to GameStop to pick up a racing game, they prioritized Burnout 2 and Need for Speed right off the bat, possibly even Double Dash if you are a Nintendo fan. I cannot even imagine, especially as a kid, purchasing 3 different racing games in the same year. So Midnight Club 2 got sidelined for pretty much everybody. Even Rockstar in present day has sidelined Midnight Club, with every game in the series being delisted from all platforms, which has caused the games to fall out of relevancy. The best racer franchise that you have never played, Rockstar didn't even want to renew the licenses, and therefore they just delisted them all. My own personal speculation is with everything happening at the studios in the 2010s and the success of Red Dead, the losing of leadership, they just didn't want to renew licenses because they were trying to purely stick to those successful IPs. And I know Midnight Club was successful. We know it was. It was the 6th highest selling racing franchise for a while. But once again, Red Dead 1 sold 23 million copies, and that's data collected from 2021. The entire Midnight Club series, across 4 games and a couple of handheld entries, they only sold around 18 million copies. It's successful, it's really successful, it's one of the best-selling racing franchises ever, but it's not Red Dead successful, especially not Midnight Club 2. I'm sorry, Midnight Club 2. You're a fantastic racing game, and I really wish you could have your day in the sun. Rockstar San Diego made another pivot with Midnight Club 3. They brought on a new creative lead through their Red Dead Revolver leader named Darren Bader. Darren Bader has worked with Rockstar as an art director and creative director on some of the Grand Theft Auto games, Red Dead games, and Midnight Club games. He's done a lot for this company, but he's gonna prove it was all worth it through Midnight Club 3 Dub Edition. You may be thinking, oh, you played the Dub Edition, that's cool. What about the base game? This is the base game. The base game version of Midnight Club 3 is called Midnight Club 3 Dub Edition. I am not joking. Part of the pivot strategy being done by Rockstar San Diego was to partner up with Dub Magazine so they could get some help on ideas for customization, which had been cut content for the last 2 games. But my own personal opinion for why they did the Dub partnership was not only to gain some knowledge on customization, but it was also to be accepted by car companies. Let me explain my speculation. Do you remember all the controversy that surrounded Grand Theft Auto games in the early 2000s?
If you're a parent, there are some other things that you should know that should send shivers down your spine if you hear these 3 words: Grand Theft Auto.
What car company was going to want to lend out their licenses to Rockstar Games, the infamously known video game company? Partnering up with a known car magazine brand like Dub was going to be the best thing for your company to be able to get a clean slate with a lot of these car brands. And guess what? It did. They finally got the rights to use them. Rockstar Games also had a whole other wrench being thrown into everything with the fact that they are losing the license rights to be able to use the engine Renderware, which was made by Criterion. And that was because Criterion was being bought out by EA. The engine that created Grand Theft Auto 3, Grand Theft Auto Vice City, and Grand Theft Auto San Andreas was being taken away from them. So that threw a wrench into everything. what were they going to do about it? And this became one of the main reasons that Dan Houser and Sam Houser and Rockstar Games as a whole had to choose Rockstar San Diego to create their new engine. No more renderware. The Rage engine would become the new go-to for their company to always use whenever they needed an engine. And the last game that Rockstar San Diego made with the previous Angel Studios engine was Midnight Club 3. Midnight Club 3 was a bit more focused than Midnight Club 2. It didn't have the pure ridiculousness of that game, but instead it had more to do with appreciating cars in general. Revealed in an IGN interview by Douglas C. Perry that included Jay Panak, who is a producer on Midnight Club 3. Jay talks about how they chose cities for the game based on the merits of the most influential cities for car culture in America. He talks about how Detroit was the birthplace of US automobiles, Atlanta was the starter for the American car customization, and San Diego had a massive influence on street racing. So the game was not a globe-trotting car adventure this time around, but instead focused more on the appreciation of car culture as a whole. The only way you were going to get that globe-trotting adventure was if you got the remix version that came out in 2006, so now the title literally was called Midnight Club 3 Dub Edition Remix. What a stupid fucking title. How confident are you to call your game something that stupid? Midnight Club 3 Dub Edition Remix. This was the version that I played, actually, because of how ridiculous the title was. It includes 24 more vehicles, and they imported Tokyo from Midnight Club 2 just for this game in particularly. That's how it becomes a globe-trotting adventure again, but it's kind of a little bit lackluster just because it is imported straight from Midnight Club 2. Midnight Club 3 was trying to become its own beast in one way or another, just like how they changed around the soundtrack feeling of the previous two games that were obsessed with the techno vibe. The techno feeling is still there, but now they have artists coming on and they licensed out some songs for it. They have some local and then some well-known rappers. The soundtrack boasted around 99 songs in the original base game and 124 songs if you were playing the remix edition. This is according to Rockstar's official page that has since been archived. Terry Donovan was the one that was always in charge of the music for these games. He was the co-founder that always took charge of that. He mentions in an interview with Games Radar that he had this idea that Midnight Club 3 would be so inclusive to the hip-hop feeling that was synonymous with dub culture at the time. It was something that dub culture embraced, was hip-hop, rap, R&B, and he succeeded at making one of the best racing soundtracks ever and one of the best soundtracks of the 2000s. The thing is as iconic to me as Silver Screen by Felice da Housecat from MC2.
Speed seduction in the magazine, endless pleasure.
I'm sorry, like, I know the song's not the greatest thing ever, but holy shit, that song is ingrained in my hippocampus. Something sparks whenever I hear that song. I'm partly joking, because most of the music on here is amazing, and I am happy that they never went the route of radio stations like Grand Theft Auto, because that was in the conversation, that was cut content. The popularity of the radio stations in Grand Theft Auto, which was also made by Rockstar, is probably the reason for this idea in the first place, but it would have boggled down the soundtrack so much in my personal opinion. If there was any actual talking, that would have just ruined the feeling, the tone, the mood of these races. I would have hated that. BMWs were also cut content, and the personality and character screens of MC2 were now taken out of the equation as well. I wonder why. All of this makes it seem like that Midnight Club was going to be more serious amongst all of the other racers. Now they had car companies backing them up, like major hitters such as GMC, Chevy, Infiniti, Dodge, Volkswagen, and Toyota. And hear me out. I do think that part of their agreement was that now you just couldn't run over pedestrians anymore, so they allowed their car company names to be used. Like, they had all these major car companies backing them up now, and you couldn't run over pedestrians anymore. They had well-known artists coming and recording tracks, and their cities weren't chosen for entertainment value, but instead were chosen to emphasize street racing culture, which is this game's highest priority. It seemed like Midnight Club 3 was going to be serious, but no. It's still very, very, very ridiculous. And for the better. That's the thing that MC3 and MC2 both have in common. It's interesting because with all of this stuff, saying bye-bye to the stereotypes, picking these places based on culture, you know, all these surface level changes that make the game more serious, It didn't really separate entirely from the tonal roots of Midnight Club 2 though. Even though MC3's identity was close to MC2's, it sold over 5 million copies across all consoles if you include the remix versions. There was also 3 million copies that were sold on PSP, and why was that? If it was so close to feeling like Midnight Club 2, then why was Midnight Club 3 such a hitter when it came up to sales? I can't imagine it was the marketing, because they didn't really put a lot into marketing. And also, whenever there's an interview regarding this game, for example with Mark Garone, who was a producer at the time, they can't go any more than 5 seconds without mentioning dub. Almost like they're being paid to mention dub. You know, it does say dub on the title. Literally, let's go through this article and count it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now, I don't want to just diss, because there are some stuff that is pointed out that is legitimate. Like, Mark does talk about how car companies were becoming more lenient about using their cars in games where they would crash or get damaged. This tracks with previous years because Need for Speed would have a game that may have a lot of traction with car companies, but Burnout would be off limits. Like, Burnout 2 would have generic car names like SUV or Coupe, which would just be the car types, and that would just be the name of their vehicles throughout the whole game. The dub partnership, regardless of how much I'm trying to crap on it, seemed altruistic. More branding for dub, more branding for Rockstar that would allow them to be taken seriously amongst car companies and also give them some insight into customization. But there's also no way to really prove this. The dub partnership would never be revived ever again. It would not be revived in Midnight Club LA, and part of that is probably because the marketing is downright fucking hilarious at times for Midnight Club 3. It feels legit unreal. Like, just look at this. Just look at this. What the fuck am I looking at? What am I looking at? Behind, is this a video game behind the scenes, or is this a money laundering scheme? Like, is this a car meet? Is this a swingers club? There's half-naked women just chilling in the background. Is there a game developer here? Is there a game? Oh, finally. Oh, let's hear what he has to say.
Dub definitely is all about hip-hop, so we're definitely.
Oh my, are you fucking kidding me? Are they never gonna not talk about dub? Dub. I didn't really know a lot about dub culture, but apparently this was a pretty big thing in the early 2000s. The massive rims, Dub magazine, and people can call me a skeptic, but the whole partnership seemed odd, and that's probably because I've never really heard of dub. Like, IGN literally had an interview with the creative director of Dub magazine to talk about how they were helping out with Midnight Club 3. To me, this would be like if you had a football player come on and start talking about how they improved the NFL game. And to be honest, they probably fucking do that. Hold up, I'm about to look this up. Do they do that? Do they actually do that? You've got to be kidding. That is so stupid. Who falls for this? Who listens to a player talk about an NFL game and is like, oh yeah, wow, insightful? That's like if Snoop Dogg got up on stage and started talking about the newest Call of Duty game and singing its praises, and you all were just like, oh yeah, new Call of Duty is gonna be good. Snoop Dogg said so. The Dub creative director talks about how they were helping out with customization. They were giving them like in-depth looks at customization and what that would look like. What customization? It's probably going to be nothing. What, a secondary color? This series doesn't ever even have customization. No, it can't be. What? Dub me the fuck up, because if Dub magazine was finally able to get Midnight Club to go all in on customization, then you got yourself a sponsor right here, Dub. Dub magazine is calling you to subscribe to Appreciation Culture right now. I know that was so subtle. That's right. My channel has the longest video essays known to man, and that's because we are out here representing Dub, which is all about having the biggest rims, so we have the biggest videos. Appreciation Culture Dub Edition Remix. That's never going to happen. Subscribe now so you can prove that dub culture is the best culture. This is just one video in my Rockstar Retrospective series, and the next one is going to be Grand Theft Auto 3, and then right after that, I'm going to be completing my Call of Duty Retrospective series that has reached over 500,000 views.
Think he's got the moves on old Moses, huh? I'll eat him for breakfast. fallen self.
Shut the fuck up, Midnight Club 2. Now time to go all in on my review for Midnight Club 3, Dub Edition. Starting up the game and holy shit. You know you were about to play the fastest racing game known to man when the main menu just zips around at the speed of sound when you're clicking on that UI. Oh, I just get excited, dude. When I see this, the Mach speed of the main menu and hear the hip-hop menu music that makes my head start instantly bopping, like I'd be doing in my own car. That's how I know I'm about to play a kick-ass game. Listen to that theme, dude. The main menu music is called Real Big, created by Manny Fresh, and it's slowly becoming one of the most iconic sounding main menu tracks that I think I've ever heard in my life. And it gets you so much more ecstatic to hear the dump of insane tracks this game has to offer. And normally, I would recommend a track or two. Normally, I'd be like, oh, you gotta listen to this, or you gotta listen to this. I would talk about one of the creators that maybe really outdid themselves. But this game, I can't do that. This album, you can find it on any music streaming outlet, on YouTube, or just purchase it. I don't care as long as you listen to it, because it is one of the most impressive soundtracks of the 2000s, and one of the best racing soundtracks ever conceived. It's got intense R&B and hip-hop tracks to make your typical fast race now make you sweat with a grin on your face. And it has a heap of talented artists on it. Some of the ones who made a bunch of the tracks are The Martian, The Rat Pack, Underground Resistance, Twista, Fabulous, Calyx, and Beanie Man. Let this be that gateway into one of the best soundtracks of the 2000s. Also, let it be your gateway to 124 new songs that you can let lead your day-to-day boring driving and create the fantasy of being a racing speed demon. I cannot emphasize that. I'm off script right now. I cannot emphasize that enough. Like, do it, please. The menu flies by, preparing for you to drive at the exact speed that the menu goes throughout the city as you commit to that first race. And when you are in that first race, you realize just how alive this game feels. The blur effect when you're speeding around in Midnight Club 2 has now been replaced. And you want to know what's been replaced by? Nothing. You can visually see the stunning world around you while you drive faster than light and in no knockoff car like in Midnight Club 2. But now you can actually drive that real Celine S7. Midnight Club 3 allows you to dub out any vehicle with everything imaginable so you can stick with your favorite car for the entirety of the game so you never have to switch vehicles. The customization has not only been introduced for the first time in the series, but it is one of the best customization features ever put in a 2000s racing game as well. It went above and beyond expectations because the expectations were nothing, because this was the first time they had performance customization or anything really involving customization in Midnight Club history. This is the same year as Need for Speed Most Wanted. Most Wanted's a great game, but it does not have the customization of MC3. Color, body, and detail to deck out the appearance of your car so you have the perfect look. That perfect dub look. We're now dub supporters here, guys. We are dub. We are the dub army. This is now a dub culture channel. And now the perfect dub look, it might not alter your performance much at all, but the performance customization also feels endless. Chassis? Cassis? I don't know. I don't speak car, but there's also tires, brakes, transmissions, and engine modification to make that car that's so ridiculously high speed. When I said earlier that it feels too good to be true how high speed that is, it can feel unreal. And now, unlike the false fantasy I joked about, now you can make the car have the highest top speed, but you can also make it have good handling, so your fantasy can be real. That Midnight Club 3 feeling of being alive when you're in one of these races, that crops up partly due to your newly customized ride that always breathes new life into these races, into the world itself. That also is not lacking whatsoever. And when I say that the world is not lacking, I'm not even talking about the environments. I'm talking about the cop AI actually does stuff in this game. This is adding new obstacles that counteract the lessening of traffic from Midnight Club 2, which was genius because not only is it more intense than Midnight Club 2, but the obstacles still feel manageable. It would be too much if we had the traffic of Midnight Club 2, but the obstacles like cops that are in Midnight Club 3. It would be way too much. The city feels more alive than ever though, with a little bit less of the traffic and a little bit more of the cop AI. The only thing that doesn't feel alive really is the fact that the removal of slamming into NPCs on the sidewalk. They needed the car licensing, I don't blame them. And Rockstar San Diego, they knew just how to make up the crime for not being able to run over pedestrians. They made, and I'm not joking, they made the most common vehicle that you will see in traffic modeled after a Honda Civic. This is my car in real life. And so it brings me so much joy to know what I'm usually smashing into, what I'm normally getting into head-on collisions with, is my own Honda Civic. And I'm sure it brings so many people joy to smash into Honda drivers. This makes up for the lack of being able to see people ragdoll into the sky. It is so funny, and all I want to do is just hit a Honda driver. They got rid of the stereotype character screens and replaced them with the on-the-fence stereotyped Hispanic mechanic. The mechanic brings such a level of charm though to the table, especially since the only real cutscenes you get in the game, it's all just boiled down to just him constantly having a sassy but truthful mouth. Brings so much charm to the table, just as much as the character screens, but he has a little bit more personality that I think people could make the argument that he's not just a stereotype. He's not a surface level stereotype just to be a joke. He actually has a personality, he has a charm to him. And that charm makes up for his lack of character, because even though he does have a personality, he doesn't really have like a character. You just kind of hear him blabber on about random things on cutscenes. This is the best character in all of Midnight Club history. I'm not even joking when I say that. There are not really any like good characters in Midnight Club history. The car mechanic from Midnight Club 3 is by far the most identifiable, iconic character ever presented in one of these video games. You'll never stop talking to in a cutscene. I swear, dude, he'll start blabbering, he'll get about 5 minutes in, and you'll be like, what? When is this gonna end? And he'll just keep on going, keep on going, keep on going. It's so weird.
Try to get funny with the price, cause this ain't the ghetto. So, baby says you like to drive with some speed, eh? Well, I can hook you up. It's all about car club down here, Holmes. Whatever you buy, there'll be somebody that will want to race it. That's the vibe down here. Beautiful cars and fast driving. Insanity, essay. So, give me a call or...
The mechanic will help you out whenever you need it with repairs or dubbing out your vehicle, so that means that you can go speeding to your next activity. Speaking of speeding and activities, the main races are in the form of the classic hook racers, where you have to chase after them throughout the city, and then you race them to the race site, and you beat them a few times before facing off against the big baddie, the city champion. These are the required races of the main story, and this is how they've always been. But there's also plenty of other activities to do. You can do tournaments, you can do money races to get some extra cash through club races. These optional activities allow for you to do a non-grindy method to be able to earn some cash, to be able to dub out your vehicle even more for the main races. While zooming through and getting my ass handed to me over and over, it does resonate with me that I miss the globe-trotting adventure of the first two games. The Tokyo just feels so similar to Midnight Club 2's, and the environments inside Midnight Club 3, while being cool, and I love that they're trying to go the more appreciation route for car culture, they don't really ever have the same diversity that the first two games do when it comes up to their environments. Detroit, Atlanta, and San Diego do look beautiful though, and driving through them is better than it's ever been, because now you don't have a lot of blur effects to your screen. You can actually look around and you can really take in how gorgeous this city is while driving. You can take in the spectacle, and you have no camera trickery, no speed blurs to make everything unseeable. You just get to see the spectacle of it all, the views. The problem is the map layout for these cities. They generally feel like urban city streets, where you have one highway for interstate races and just a pile of city streets that blend together very easily. Midnight Club 2 made a point with its environments, as we talked about earlier. One in Europe with Paris, one in America with LA, and one in Japan with Tokyo. They all look distinct in their own rights just due to the culture of the cities that they were tackling, but this expanded into the map design as well. Each one of these maps felt like they were tackling different types of races, such as Paris with the roundabouts, the complicated pathing to beat a race. LA had cramped streets, sharp turns, and no long tracks. So in Tokyo with its forever non-stop streets that are going to allow you to be able to hit the top speed with those final cars in the game that will actually let you go that fast. MC3 just lacks this level of diversity due to how the cities look and also how they're presented in terms of layout. Each map needed to fulfill their credentials: tight corners, short streets, but long interstate highways, that's it. And part of this was probably due to the fact that they added activities that would be a pain in the ass if you were constantly switching up the way the level designs worked. I just really love the idea of environmental variety. I love the idea of maps that give me something new. And the maps in this game don't really do that, not nearly as much as the previous two did. Now, am I thinking about this while I'm playing Midnight Club 3 Dub Edition? Nope, not at all, because this is easily the most full content-filled package of any Midnight Club game ever made. It's my personal favorite of the series, and if you want the ideal Midnight Club experience, this is the game to buy. Because even though the environments aren't really expanded off of that globe-trotting idea of Midnight Club 2, they did add plenty of features that make Midnight Club 3 distinct compared to the last one. Midnight Club 2 added a bunch of special abilities like tailgating nitrous and the burnout system that was going to make it different from MC1, and Midnight Club 3 Dub Edition makes no exception. This game has a bunch of special abilities that you unlock as you play through the game. One is called Aggro, that allows you to push cars out of your way with no impact to your vehicle. According to the wiki, by the way, this is only available for SUVs and trucks and luxury sedans. Roar is another special ability, which was used to push and cause traffic to move out of the way for you rather than having to slam into them and push them out of the way. This is for muscle cars and choppers. Everything else has Zone, which lets you drive in slow motion for a few seconds so you can make a sharp turn or avoid cars that might get in your way. All of these abilities can be unlocked and then tailored to your vehicle within the single player in the garage due to our lovely mechanic over here. This adds more customization. This adds more ways to be able to help yourself out in a situation when things are going south, unlike the first Midnight Club game. Everyone talks about how Midnight Club 2 and 3 and LA are all hard games, and people sometimes even say that they're the hardest in the series, but this is where I disagree. It's because of these types of abilities. It's because of these things that can get you out of a sticky situation in all of these Midnight Club games that I think these games are significantly easier than Midnight Club 1. They're still hard games, there is no doubt about that, but they feel more fair. These abilities can help you out when things are going south, but that doesn't mean that the abilities make the game easy, which is what I love. The game is still harder than ever before, even with all the customization and with some of the quality of life improvements. Like, for example, they tell you exactly what race you are on with each racer, just in case you forgot while you're going through these races dozens upon dozens of times, trying to get through all three of them with one racer. So you'll go in, you'll start racing one of the main hook racers, you'll be going through all three of the races, and let's say you did one of them 10 times and you forget you're only on the first race. The game will remind you, the game will tell you what race you're on, and that is very convenient. After losing 30 or so times, you might be thinking, well, you know, just one more, I might almost be done, but then you realize you're only one out of the 3 races, so then you just rage quit and go to multiplayer, which is reserved now for 2-player split screen. Unfortunately, 2-player split screen is definitely a downgrade from 4-player split screen, but there's still an expanded playlist of game modes that were included in the split screen and in the online mode. You've got unordered races for that OG concept with checkpoints. You've got ordered races. You've got autocross races in case you want something that feels a little bit more controlled, like a Need for Speed game or like a NASCAR experience. And then you have circuit races. There's also a paint mode where you have to collect as many checkpoints as possible to paint the town in your team's color. Then there's also frenzy mode where you have a small interval of time to get from one checkpoint to the next, and to the next, and if you run out of time, it's too late for you, you've lost. All of these activities and many more, just like Capture the Flag, were included in the 6-racer multiplayer. The PSP version of the game even had multiplayer. I mention all of this because it is so important to talk about games that were willing to step up to the plate for multiplayer, even if I didn't really get to play it, and even though it doesn't really affect my positive review of the game. Instead, I wasted my time away using the racing editor, which is a huge improvement off of the last game, but it still has that superfluous feeling against the bots because they are horrible at racing on your own map. They might even be worse in this game than they are in MC2. And I know some people would scream about how these are meant to be played with one of your friends, but like, don't you want to test out the racetrack and just see if you could play against bots on it? Or even if you and your friend are both going to play, you could add some bots to the map. Their programming just sucks on these custom maps, which is such a missed opportunity because I want to really love the racing editor in MC2 and MC3. But the problem is that the AI cannot keep up with the racing editor. Literally, look at how much I beat the bots by. Look at that number. Over a minute. Like, and that's just the second place guy. When we take the comparison game to Midnight Club 2 out of the equation, is this still a great game? Abso-freaking-lutely. This is one of the fastest racing games I have ever played out of the 2000s. And on top of being the fastest, it's also one of the most full content packages ever offered in a racing game. 3 different maps that you can race on, with a ton of different maps you can play on with your friends, with a ton of different game modes, with a ton of different tournaments and races that you can compete for, a massive customization catalog, and a huge soundtrack. And also, let's just be honest, I'm a sucker for a really good main menu, and this is up there. This is a fantastic main menu. The way it's presented, it's not still whatsoever, which is just great for a racing game, because if you're constantly moving around, so should the main menu. The main menu should just be flying all over the place. Whoever made this deserves a compliment. I love the main menu to this game. Somebody said, chef's kiss with that main menu. It just perfects an already perfect video game. It's the icing on the cake. There's 94 vehicles to pick from in the remix version, over 100 songs on the soundtrack, 3 massive cities to explore, a bunch of activities, a difficulty that'll throw you out on the street and call you a shitty driver, and all of this adds up to being one of the greatest racing games that I have ever played. I mean it when I say it's the most complete package I've played from a game in a while. I really didn't think they were going to improve off of Midnight Club 2. I thought this would be one of those games I was going to pop it on, I was going to figure out it was super overrated. You know what I'm talking about, where you hear, oh, it's one of the greatest things ever, one of the greatest things ever, and you play it and you're kind of like, that was fine, I guess. I was genuinely blown away by how much I enjoyed these games. And even though I enjoyed smashing through every Honda Civic on the road, I also enjoyed smashing through every Midnight Club game out there. But I have to change up how I was playing every video game due to how different each one of them was, and that is no exception with Midnight Club LA. Midnight Club 1 was the hardest game of the series for me. Midnight Club 2 was the most goofy of the series. And Midnight Club 3, that wins it overall for me, being the most filled to the brim package in the series. If you have never played one of these games and you walk away from this video thinking, maybe I'll give one of these a shot, make it Midnight Club 3 dub edition, because you can never get too much dub in the world. That's the advice from Appreciation Culture. That's the advice from me, Tyler, but that's also the advice from the mechanic. And you should listen to him more than any one of us other fuckers out here. Go get yourself a copy of Midnight Club 3 Dub Edition Remix. I'm gonna take a slow down right here for a second and try to explain my point from the beginning of this video. This is why Midnight Club is so worth playing to this day. It's one of the best racers ever. It has no consistency between the titles, but yet they all succeed in their own ways at accomplishing their own individual goals. The customization in 3, that is amazing. The insanity and goofiness of 2. And even though 1 lacks in a lot of ways, its unique ideas that expanded off of Angel Studios' Midtown Madness series will remind me of why to respect the original always, why we should always respect the original. And even though the sequels are the reason why Midnight Club is one of the most perfect racing franchises ever, Midnight Club 1 should still get respect. And Midnight Club LA is no exception to this perfection. To none of our surprise, MLA format, Times New Roman, font 12. To none of our surprise, Midnight Club LA deviates from the formula of Midnight Club more than any other title in this entire series. It's not nearly as over the top as MC2 or MC3, and albeit it is still an arcade racer. It looks and feels more similar to a modern Need for Speed game, though, than the flying over the buildings and the loose physics of the previous 2 Midnight Club games. You feel the weight. It's not floaty like its predecessors, and I want to explain why that is, but I also want to explain why MLA is the furthest a Midnight Club game has ever deviated from the formula, the inconsistent formula, I might add, so far. That inconsistency is why this series is so amazing. It's the fact that you could pop in any game and you honestly are surprised by what you're getting. It's something I don't think I've ever felt out of any other racer in my life. Midnight Club at this point was at the height of popularity, with MC3 ranking as number 9 for top game rentals in 2005. And this was before they released the remix version in 2006. Finally, Angel Studios had proven that as Rockstar San Diego, they had earned the Rockstar name, right? From 2004 to 2006, regardless of the good releases that Rockstar San Diego was having, the internal affairs could not be farther from that. Red Dead Revolver was surrounded by crunch time with new management that came in, according to this Polygon article called How Red Dead Began. Then there was Agent, which we had talked about earlier, which nobody was prepared for the mess that became. A bunch of lead developers and artists headed to Cairo to take some pictures for missions for the game, and they were detained there. And this took a while to get resolved, so these people were detained in Cairo, in another country. This whole situation would take a while to get resolved, so these people were just sitting in Cairo detained while there was still pressure of a crunch time for prototypes of the game Agent. Now there was new management as well after Diego Angel left in 2005, according to that Polygon article, The Agent Before Agent. These 2 articles, by the way, on Polygon is where I'm getting most of my information from. The Agent Before Agent and How Red Dead Began. You can find these both online. They are great, very well written articles. And that's very surprising coming from Polygon. Rockstar San Diego had so much on their plate, from making prototypes for this new game, people in detainment, employees leaving, trying to work on this new engine, and finishing up and wrapping out and shipping out Midnight Club 3 and Red Dead Revolver. This engine was the number 1 priority, though. This was the new engine that Rockstar Games needed for Agent and for every single Rockstar next-gen title that they were going to use on Xbox 360 and PS3, since they couldn't use that renderware engine anymore. But in 2006, when going into next gen, Rockstar also received a lawsuit that was claiming that over 100 of their ex-San Diego employees never got paid overtime. And Rockstar basically said, we did nothing wrong. They were like, no, we just didn't want to bother fighting that in court. It could cost us too much money. But then they proceeded to pay a settlement of around $3 million, which equaled out to around $27,500 per employee. Their defense was that they didn't have the time and it would have cost them more money to go to court, but yet they just paid the settlement and moved on. That's $3 million. This was all written about in an article by Ben Gilbert for Engadget titled Rockstar Quietly Settled Class Action Lawsuit. That's over 100 people. Like, to me, that's a very serious allegation against them. But in 2006, they premiered the first look of San Diego's new and improved Rockstar engine, Rage, with, you guessed it, Rockstar's table tennis game. I do plan on reviewing this during my Rockstar Retrospective series. I'm going into that game blind. I've never seen that game before in my life. MLA wouldn't come out until 2008, which is probably thanks to all of the struggles that were moving into the 7th generation console, which this console era would not help out Midnight Club 3 specifically. It just did not at all. For a game that was released in 2005 and was so popular, it was just depressing as all get out that it never got the physical form release that it deserved on 7th generation consoles, Xbox 360 and PS3. It got its remix version in 2006, but it was only available on digital storefronts for PS3, and then it was physically available on PS2, PSP, and the original Xbox. I literally guarantee that Midnight Club 3 would have sold so many copies if they had moved over and made an Xbox 360 and PS3 version. At least a PS3 HD version or whatever. I don't know. They should have put something into this game to have its longevity last into the 7th generation console, they should have gave this game the Bully Scholarship Edition treatment, or the Grand Theft Auto San Andreas treatment, where they re-released it on Xbox 360 and PS3, and for some reason, they just never did it. This would have supported the lifespan of Midnight Club 3, but it just didn't seem like a high priority on their list whatsoever, and eventually it became one of the things that destroyed Midnight Club 3. It was time, and time became one of the destroyers of the Midnight Club franchise in general. Time would become this franchise's greatest enemy, with Midnight Club 3 being delisted on digital storefronts like PS3 within just 10 years of release, which was a shorter interval of time than Midnight Club 2's delisting, which happened in 2018. Dub Edition was delisted in 2014, only 9 years after release. One of their most popular Midnight Club games, and they kicked it to the curb so quickly, and they just never supported the longevity of Midnight Club as a series. This just wouldn't help for a game like Midnight Club 5 to ever get off the ground. Like, who's gonna play it? Like, there's only such a niche fan base for it now. There's no doubt that the reason why this shit got delisted just as fast as frickin' Marvel's Avengers is because of the dub partnership, all the different car licenses, and the massive soundtrack that they would have had to license out like a third of the songs. All of these licenses cause games to get delisted so much faster. Midnight Club 3 was never exempt from that. But it's still stupefying to me because they could have just renewed these licenses even for a couple more years, with it being one of the highest selling Midnight Club games until this point. The game was delisted in a post Red Dead Redemption era though, which makes me think that because of that Red Dead Redemption success, because Midnight Club was never as successful as Red Dead Redemption, they just didn't bother, and that's just sad. That just breaks my heart. Even with the fact that that title is so outdated, I would still give most of my racing game experiences just for that game to have an elongated lifespan, so that means that could be more represented. Midnight Club 3 represents everything I love about extreme classic 2000s racers. And that's exactly what Midnight Club Los Angeles does for me, except it's everything I love about the modern racer, the modern 7th generation onward racer. Before I talk about everything I love about Midnight Club LA, we need to discuss the obvious, the SUV in the room. Rockstar Games wanted an engine that they could call their own, so that means they would never lose the rights to it. Rockstar Games took Rage and started their work with Rockstar North on GTA 4, with San Diego beginning work on Midnight Club LA. While Agent got shipped over to Rockstar North and all those assets that were made were shipped over to Red Dead Redemption, little did Rockstar Games think, though, that Midnight Club LA, with this new engine, would pave the way for the groundwork that GTA 5 would walk on in 2013. That's right, I'm convinced that Midnight Club LA inspired quite a few things about GTA 5, and while I don't think it deserves as much credit as like GTA 4 or something like that, it does not deserve zero credit. And it's hilarious because the game does get zero credit, yet when you're playing it, it's so obvious that there is proof in the pudding for Midnight Club LA. So everything from the ragdoll to the physics, that by the way, the physics in Grand Theft Auto 4 and Midnight Club LA are some of the best that were available on 7th generation console hardware. Rage's other strengths were in the beautiful weather and the worlds that you could create in it. I'm looking at you, Red Dead 2, with your lightning effects that make the real world lightning pictures blush. It's insanity how good this game looks with this engine. And according to Eurogamer.net, an article written by Kirk McKeand, Rockstar was one of the only companies that was working in tandem with Euphoria, which was a dynamic physics software that was used to make the realistic ragdoll and the physics within the Rage engine. They used some of this software to be able to enhance their engine, and that's what you see in all Rockstar games. And if you want to hear a funny fun fact that is also brought up in the same article, it's that one of the only other games to use Euphoria physics software is Star Wars Force Unleashed, which explains why when you force push a stormtrooper, they stumble around like a drunk Russian getting out of his this taxi in the middle of Liberty City. This physics software is another piece in the puzzle for why the car physics looks so amazing in Grand Theft Auto 4. You can say whatever you want about the driving, I don't care. If you want to say that it's, buttery roads, you want to say that the driving sucks, I don't care. There is an impressive balance between the floatiness and the weight that each car has in that game, and the physics and the crashing looks beautiful. Now, Midnight Club LA's cars have a lot more weight to them than Grand Theft Auto 4's. Don't think I'm comparing the two, because I'm not. But the physics engine within Midnight Club LA can be seen through the thousands of objects that you can hit on the road or the other cars you can crash into on the road. Other impressive features of this engine would be weather and AI pathing that you would see in GTA 4 and 5 civilians working in this real world to try and give the illusion that it is a real world, that it goes past just being a video game. But this would not really be seen in Midnight Club LA because the AI presented to us is difficult, but I rarely have ever referred to racing AI as smart. I rarely even refer to any racing AI as smart because usually they're just not that complex. There was some crazy AI features though that were cut from the game, like apparently this included your license plate being called out by police, and even a funny nod to Need for Speed, because if your license plate said N4S sucks, the police would actively say Need for Speed sucks. This is all information from a video made by SuperTypes1 called Things You Didn't Know About Midnight Club LA. Also in this cut content was multiple cars like the Dodge Ram and multiple Honda cars, according to a Reddit post by Turbo GS40. Apparently there was going to be Detroit DLC though in this game, which eventually transitioned into becoming an idea for a city in Midnight Club 5, but the DLC and the idea of a fifth game fizzled out in 2014 due to the co-founders of Rockstar Games getting into heated arguments with each other. Midnight Club 5, in my own personal opinion, was probably canceled pretty soon after the release of Red Dead Redemption rather than after Leslie Benzies left the company. This is my own personal speculation because what ended up happening due to everything I just listed I think led to the cancellation of GTA 5 DLCs and Bully 2. For me, I just think Midnight Club 5 was probably canceled sooner than those other two games. I don't feel like Midnight Club 5 got too far into production. My own speculation is that as soon as Leslie left and the rest of these games were canceled, Rockstar probably had internal conversations about creating more single-player games, but ultimately they realized how much money they were making off of GTA Online alone. They were making $2.5 million a day in revenue. A day. To put this in perspective, there's around 2,000 employees working across all offices for Rockstar Games, which, breaking that down, that would be able to give $1,250 to each employee every day in revenue. I know this is not what they do with their money, and I know this does not account for all the costs that go into making this stuff, but do you really think making a cosmetic or making an update for GTA Online, updating an existing game, costs more or less than in creating an entirely separate story DLC, or creating an entirely different single-player game on its own? Exactly. It doesn't cost as much. Labor costs are lower, revenue is higher. So you want to know the explanation as to why they don't make single-player games? It's very, very simple. Labor costs are lower, revenue is higher. We all understand why this is the case, but I really do wish they would focus back on making single-player games. I love Max Payne, I love LA Noire, I love Manhunt, I love Bully, and I freaking love Midnight Club. I probably would have loved Agent 2. GTA is still going strong and so is Red Dead 2, but there is so much more love that can be spread around with a studio at this level of talent. They don't care to do that with other video game IPs anymore, but hopefully they can prove me wrong for the remaining of the 2020s. Because for a game series like Midnight Club that they drove into the ocean, it sure did a lot to make GTA 5 one of the most successful video games ever made. Midnight Club LA differentiated itself from its predecessors in almost every way by focusing on the realistic racing world, which is ironically enough Los Angeles, GTA, San Andreas, whatever you want to see it as, I don't care. It can be called Midnight Club SA, San Andreas. Midnight Club LA did not care to recreate Los Angeles with long racetracks like Midnight Club 2 or 3, but instead they opted to recreate the realistic, the real world, and they did that verbatim, which was different from every Midnight Club game before it. The only way to have the full city unlocked though was if you had the complete edition, which that's kind of bullshit. It was like 33% of the map. This complete edition had the stereotypical more of the map was unlocked, more songs, more cars if you buy this copy of the game, the complete edition, which that is the one that I played. Midnight Club LA also relished in that far more realistic physics and driving engine that they wanted to be immersive, but they also wanted it to be fast. Instead of showing off their speed like the Midnight Club 3 menu does, LA decided to not even have a menu at all, and instead went for this. Grand Theft Auto 5 presented its character switching mechanic of zooming in and out of areas while the game was loading as revolutionary, but MLA, was doing this back when announced in 2006 and then when released in October 24th, 2008. Now, the speed of this series was being represented through the technological feats of the Rage engine rather than having to show you how fast the game is. The game could just naturally be fast rather than having to show you through visuals how fast the game is. The cops are an extreme threat this time around, which makes Midnight Club LA feel more like a street racing game with pursuit challenges rather than the standard arcade racer that we saw from MC3 and MC2. The cops mean business in this game. In fact, they can't even just make you lose a race. They can also bust you and literally have you arrested. Another major deviation is that the main character of Midnight Club 3 actually speaks this time around. The main character has motives, a full-fledged story, and cutscenes that don't just revolve around one character like the mechanic, but they actually revolve around a bunch of people telling you that you suck at racing. They're known as the player, and they don't really have any real name outside of that unless you play the PSP version where they make reference that their name could possibly be Matthew.
My mama calls me Matthew, but you can call me anything you want.
Speaking of the PSP version, the story is quite simple in both iterations. You're moving up the ladder, you have to fight the city champ, you beat the city champ in certain regions of LA, and finally when you prove yourself to LA, you become the ultimate racing city champion. So simple, like it's just regional champions you're facing off with, and then you lead up to the major big boy, the big boss of LA. In the PSP ending though, which is actually quite a bit different. You get invited to go to Tokyo, and a plane flight happens at the end of the game. The player asks on the phone call why they're going to Tokyo, and they ask, is it because of the Midnight Club? Which besides this just being a title drop, it is also based on a real group of infamous street racers that were from Japan that the title is based on. Now, there are actually a lot of complaints revolving around the PSP version of Midnight Club LA, but something that is really cool is once you beat the storyline within Los Angeles, you actually unlock Tokyo as a city that you can explore. Maybe there would have been a Tokyo DLC from Midnight Club LA, but it seems unlikely because the PSP version does take a lot of assets from Midnight Club 3 and 2, which makes you think that that was just the plan for the PSP version rather than being some future endeavor they were gonna do. I will admit though, a realistic from the ground up portrayal of Tokyo in a racing game, that is my ideal location for a Midnight Club 5. I love the idea of going to other countries outside of America for one of these racing games and rebuilding Tokyo realistically, like rebuilding it verbatim the way the city looks and making a racing game out of it. That's like a dream come true for me. That would be just sick. I don't know if I've ever actually played a game where they realistically created Tokyo within the game, especially a racing game, which that would just be crazy. I'd be there day one after pre-ordering that game. And the main character to Midnight Club LA isn't necessarily like a major con, but they are annoying in regards that they just don't really do much. I feel like that Dan Houser was trying to get Rockstar to jump headfirst into the cinematic era of gaming, which was with Grand Theft Auto 3, Vice City, and San Andreas. I feel like he was trying to catch up with that with Midnight Club LA, but realized that writing a story around a racing game was far less interesting than writing a story for a Grand Theft Auto game. We all know that Dan Houser loves to create a cinematic world with his scripts. He loves to make characters that are complex, in-depth, and self-destructive, and I think that that was something that maybe he would have wanted to do with Midnight Club LA, but then kind of just realized that it just wasn't going to work out, so then they just gave the main character a bunch of BS BS dialogue.
Go race them, then we'll talk.
Okay.
Good luck, homie. Come on, y'all, let's get something to eat. See if they can do me a burger low carb.
Enjoy.
You can really see Dan Houser shine through Grand Theft Auto games and through Red Dead Redemption games, especially Red Dead 2. You can really see him explore those characters with subtlety and nuance and just amazing arcs all around. Red Dead 2 has some of the greatest video game characters ever written. Those cinematic elements for Midnight Club LA, though, those don't really fall into the script, but they do fall into the gameplay, and this is done to perfection with the fluid, dynamic camera system. But opinions are starting to unravel, so it's time for me to just review Midnight Club LA, also known as MLA, also known as Midnight Club LA The Complete Edition. Not the PSP port LA remix that was developed by Rockstar London, but the Rockstar San Diego Midnight Club The Complete Edition. Midnight Club LA answers the question of the consistency issue across the board that Midnight Club has had. No consistency between any of them with the exception of MC2 and 3 being a little bit similar. So the question the studio had to ask was, how are we going to make an arcade racer more realistic without taking away the speed and intensity during a race? The answer to this lies into their new engine that allows for that fluid camera that I mentioned earlier. Speed is this game's main objective, but not in the conventionally arcadey way of MC3, but in a more technical way to show off 7th generation hardware. Constantly presenting to you how fast it is without ever having to remind you with a filter or a blur or a bloom effect of how fast it really is. The loading is non-existent. The camera zooms out over the map and then it zooms right back into the racetrack. Look familiar to GTA 5? I was able to play around 20 races in this game in a little over an hour, which means around 3 minutes per race, and that goes to show the speed of this game on a technical level. I would just go from race to race to race to race to race to race to race, and it was just faster than lightning. And sure, given that this copy of the game is post-patch, because when the game first came out, the difficulty of the first few races was so hard that later on Rockstar actually patched the game, so that means that the beginning of it was easier. So when I say all this, I'm trying to point out that later on in the game you'll be losing so much due to the difficulty spikes that 20 races will become quickly 3 races per hour. It's not going to always be 20 races per hour. Sooner or later you're going to get stuck on something. But the fact of the matter is that if I always won these races, I could pretty much do as many races as I want within an hour, and that's absolutely incredible, not just for the speed of Midnight Club LA, but the speed that the Rage engine exploits on the 7th generation hardware. There is no menu. This is one of the first games I think I've ever seen where there is absolutely no menu, because they don't want to show you how fast the game can be, because they don't want to remind you that the game is fast. They just want to show you that it is fast. And where the story lacks in garnering feelings of emotion or care about the main character, all of those emotions go into the V8 engine gameplay. That speed is always relishing itself into my favorite aspect of this game, my absolute favorite, the camera. This game might literally have one of my favorite cameras ever put into a video game. Usually when a camera is in a video game, if it's good, it goes unnoticed. If it's bad, it goes noticed. But in this case, it's one of the only games I've ever played where I noticed it, but it was all good stuff. So there's different settings for the camera, but if you turn that baby on dynamic mode, watch the magic happen. Like seriously, your race is gonna go from feeling like a typical generic street racer where the camera is just a certain distance behind your vehicle to the camera locking in, moving closer to your vehicle whenever you do sharp turns, zooming in and out when driving faster, and intensifying whenever you're braking. All of these fluid camera movements make for one of the most authentic feeling street racing experiences in any video game of the 7th generation. Absolutely breathtaking. And all of those emotions I never felt once during the cutscenes of this game, but I always felt it during the gameplay. That's what it all comes down to, the gameplay. It's from the physics, it's from the engine, it's from that beautifully paced gameplay where you zoom in and out of races instantly, where you go from one scenario to the next seamlessly with no menu. But the most important feature to me is the emotions I feel from this camera moving in and out and being all over your fucking car, doing dances around your car as you drive during a race. Is it a little manipulating? Is your car not as fast as it was in Midnight Club 3? I mean, yeah, no, it's not. It's not as fast, but that's because this is trying to be a more realistic racer. It feels just as intense as Midnight Club 3 ever did without the speed of driving that MC2 or MC3 have. It manages to add all this speed into every other aspect of the game, technically and then through the camera. And they did all of that while also making your driving more grounded, with your car never flying off rooftops like in the predecessors. All those stunts have been replaced by this camera that can make a sharp turn feel just as sweat-inducing as a massive jump over a building. Also, this game still has motorcycles that are significantly easier to drive than they are in MC2 and 3, which I prefer because even though some may love the lightning fast speeds of the motorcycle in MC2, I found it kind of nauseating because I'd give my character a concussion every 2.5 seconds from smashing into a wall at 90 miles per hour. It's just ridiculous. Like I can't work with that. I can't do anything. This game was easy enough for me to use a motorcycle. And going off of the motorcycles, talking about the customization, there might be a little bit less going on here than MC3, with slightly less cars in general, to be honest, but the customization rules still apply here. You can still use the same car from start to finish. Might be a little bit more difficult, but you can dub out your vehicle in this game just like MC3, and you can use it from start to finish, even if there's slightly less customization and there's slightly less vehicles in general. After dubbing and customizing your car, you'll start searching for your next target through activities on the map or the next main race. It can be a little daunting to figure out what to do though, because the game doesn't really exactly tell you what the main objective is. What are the main races? The game doesn't really ever clarify this for you, and that's why it can be a little bit intimidating, but the map does do a great job at dividing up activities and races into colored categories to show you which is going to be the easiest for you and the hardest. So if you start with the easiest and work your way up, you can do all 97 missions that this game has to offer, which doesn't even include any of the side material. The 97 missions just comes from the hook racers, just comes from the people that you race 3 times and then move on. I'm the type of person where if a game just presents me with a bunch of missions, I'm just gonna do them. Doesn't matter if they're side stuff, doesn't matter if they're main stuff, I'll just go easiest to hardest and keep on doing that. And for me, that was very satisfying because I always had money to upgrade my vehicle. I never felt like I was rushing through the game, and I didn't actually end up beating the game, but that's because this game can get pretty long towards the latter half, especially with how difficult it becomes. Working your way up that ladder though is just as gratifying as it is satisfying to see your car get dubbed out with the increase in money you receive after every single race. The only exception to this in terms of the activity is a controversial racing feature called pink slip racing. We're gonna go into that because that is extremely polarizing. I love games that push me on my ass and dare me to get the fuck back up. The pink slip races were designed so you could bet your own cars in the race, and if you won, you'd get a fantastic vehicle, but if you lost, you'd lose your car. You'd lose that dubbed out monstrosity that you bet. Rockstar knew people would try to reset their consoles, so they actually autosave you during the race, so if you turn off your system, then you automatically lose your vehicle. You can call this douchey, you can call it whatever you want, but I love a game that's got balls to do stuff like this. If you're not ready to commit to one of these races, then don't do the race. Like, I'm sorry, that's just the way I feel. It reminds me of people who will play a role-playing game and they'll shut off their console if their favorite character dies just to reset it, so that means that they can start over and then they can get that character back. I hate that. Commit to your decisions and accept the consequences of your decision. Get over it. But even if you disagree with that mentality entirely, even if you still think it's the douchiest thing ever to make you lose your car automatically, even if you reset your console, you can call it whatever you want, but if you really hate it, you can just turn off autosaves in the main menu and you can reset all the livelong day without ever losing your vehicle. You can also still use overpowered vehicles, overpowered motorcycles in all of these races. Expect though, the last few pink slip races are going to be the hardest with a massive difficulty spike that can be felt across the game as a whole. As you get to the last few activities in each respective game mode, landmark races, red light races, tournaments, pink slip races, whatever it is, you can guarantee that eventually the game is going to bring its A game, and I'll be honest, I love this. but it was one of the main reasons why I didn't get to the end of it. I'll come back around because eventually a sadist always comes back, but there is only so many times I can slam a controller against the ground while losing in a race. There's a whole other slew of improvements that come with the new engine as well as just the game as a whole, with the handling in this game with vehicles and motorcycles being significantly easier. It was the solution to a problem that I didn't even know existed. The handling in this game, partially due to that camera, is beautiful. It feels so smooth. No more slamming into walls that you feel like your car randomly flew into. Everything just feels buttery smooth with the gas pedal and the brake pedal being perfectly in tandem handling wise, which is the first time I have ever been able to say that about a Midnight Club game. Everything has weight, but it also has just enough floatiness to make it feel like you can drive the car through sharp turns really, really fast, or get through traffic and weave in and out of it without having to just crash into something that you didn't mean to crash into. It's that balance between weight and floatiness. It feels so much more intense because of the LA city that's been brought to life from the ground up, the rigid driving that feels more constricting, but the camera is constantly counteracting this and making it still feel intense and fast. The difficulty just never left. So much so that it feels like the game is just made for me to throw a controller against the wall towards the end game races. People can call it annoying, and I get it. But once you're there, once you've hit that difficulty spike, you gotta admit it was one hell of a ride before you hit that difficulty spike. And even when you're there, I still feel like there's plenty of enjoyment to get out of the game. I feel like that sometimes the hardest races can be the most intense, even if they take you 20 times to beat. That's why they're intense. I will admit, on the unfortunate side, I do think the 33% increase on the map of LA through the complete edition is just kind of weird. It also, just LA in general being the only city in the game does feel quite limiting compared to MC3, MC2, or MC1. It's not even just that there's no globetrotting adventure anymore, it's that it's literally just one map. And don't get me wrong, this is the biggest map that the series has ever seen. I still feel like that you could take 2 of the maps from the last 3 games and it would be bigger than this map is in its entirety. It's not really a diss to Midnight Club LA, but it's just something that is somewhat bothering to me. As somebody with the last game, I already had the complaint that I enjoyed the globetrotting adventure of Midnight Club 1 and Midnight Club 2, and then now there's not even 3 cities anymore. Now it's just 1 city. Do I even notice it though in Midnight Club LA? No, because I didn't notice it in Midnight Club 3 either. Some may argue that you should get MLA on PSP because Tokyo's in it, which that is true, but as I said earlier, the problem is that LA and Tokyo in that game feel like they were ported higher-end graphics versions of Midnight Club 2. It feels like it has the mechanics of Midnight Club 3, but it has the cities with higher end graphics from Midnight Club 2. And that could be awesome for somebody, but it's just not Midnight Club LA. It really just isn't. It doesn't feel similar whatsoever to a lot of people. It basically just feels like an entirely different game, and I am sure that's awesome for some people. I've barely touched it, so I can't even say a lot about it. I do know that many people online have said that it's a terrible representation of Midnight Club LA on console. Going back to the map complaint, Los Angeles in general does feel a little bit more limiting, especially without the outskirts that you see that are added into Rockstar games like Grand Theft Auto 5. Does it mean I don't enjoy my time in Los Angeles? Absolutely not. These past 3 entries I'd argue are all fantastic and all on equal quality, but I just wish they would go back to international street racing rather than just the United States. It's a personal wish of mine, and I'd still never hold it against Midnight Club LA because it's not the point of the game. They built the whole city from the ground up in a scale that rivals 2 cities from the previous titles being slammed together. LA is just huge, and that's because it wasn't made in a similar approach to the last 3 games. And that's part of the thing that bothers me, but I also just need to accept it because that is the point of Midnight Club LA, that it was just one city that was realistically built. It's not making maps like how MC2's creators said that they were making every map feel like a racetrack that you could fly from one end to the other in about a minute. Going off from the map, going off of the main story, going off of that intense driving from the camera, we're gonna talk about the multiplayer, where they brought back the arcade mode, but now there is no split screen, and the online has been no longer available on PS3 for years. Apparently on Xbox, it's still up. I read this in a few different places, which is crazy, but I'm unsure about the player base numbers. I'm sure nobody's on it. Presumably it would just be dead. Rate My Ride was also an online feature where you could create a custom car design, then sell that design in game, or just have people rate it. This is an amazing community feature, but sadly this was shut down even before the online was shut down. Honestly, I know that it is very hard to make split screen work on modern generation consoles, but with the racing editor, the arcade modes, Midnight Club LA would have benefited off of a 2-player mode. Some of my favorite racers ever, like Need for Speed Most Wanted, would have benefited off of a split screen mode. It doesn't mean they're not one of my favorite racers ever anymore, but there's just so many racing titles that would benefit off of split screen that just don't have it, and it's so dang frustrating. The racing editor on here is literally the best this series has ever seen, where you can personally drive around and mark your checkpoints on the map for a race. You drive around and just click on a button to create your checkpoints. It is such an accessible system. It is so easy to use. And all of the arcade modes and this would have skyrocketed if I could just play split screen. But sadly, unless you have an Xbox, friends online, you both have a copy of the game, and you're both willing to get online and play it together, you're probably just not going to get anywhere with this. At least the race bots are better this time around. I can confidently say the bots will actually race correctly on your edited maps for the first time in Midnight Club history. Woo, woo, look, they did it. They did it, guys. The AI can actually adjust itself to your edited maps. And if this is the last Midnight Club game, then I consider that to be a final game triumph, is that I can actually face off against the bots on my map without having to literally beat them by 2 minutes. So I think that the main lesson that can be taken from MLA is its motto, which is that less can be more. There's only 40 cars in Midnight Club LA, there's less cities, and the racing doesn't look like something that Trevor from Grand Theft Auto 5 would imagine on his spare time, the ridiculousness of MC2 and 3. It does not have that. And there's a realistic portrayal of a city rather than an exaggerated one. Day and night cycles rather than it just always being midnight, weather effects and physics that will make your jaw drop. Midnight Club LA took a massive departure from the starting formula that MC2 and 3 were creating, and they hit a fucking home run. They got first place. I can't stand the talking protagonist. I can't stand some of the difficulty spikes. I can't stand that it's just one city. The things that actually bother me, it's not the point of the game. It's me projecting what I want from a Midnight Club game rather than what they are, which the ideal Midnight Club game is that it does deviate from the last one, because that's literally what they always do. They always change up what Midnight Club is, and it will never make sense to me, but it doesn't have to if the games are great. My ideal game combination would be the driving from MC2 and 3 with the camera of MCLA sprinkled with multiple cities from across the world. That will never get made. And it's okay, because Midnight Club LA is still one of the best racing games of the 2000s, and so is Midnight Club 3, and so is Midnight Club 2. They are all masterpieces in their own right, with the foundation that began with the flawed but important Midnight Club 1 and Midtown Madness. That is the key to this series. It is the inconsistency. It is going all over the place. It is making games that feel entirely different from one another. And that's why I'm not annoyed when they don't reach my expectations like I am with series like Need for Speed, Burnout, or Gran Turismo, or Forza Horizon if those don't meet my expectations. There's no expectation with Midnight Club. If you have an expectation, it's from one game that you played a lot. It's not from all of the games, because all of the games feel entirely different. Seeing Angel Studios go from porting Resident Evil 2 to making one of the greatest racing games ever to creating one of the greatest games ever with Red Dead Redemption is one hell of a journey. One that was difficult, but not as difficult as some of these fucking races are in Midnight Club LA. We may never see another Midnight Club game again due to the labor issues, the leadership gone, the refocusing on the online of these games, the sales never outpacing Red Dead, the difficulty being so hard in an era of gaming that didn't appreciate when a game would test your limits. Nowadays, people would probably appreciate that with games like Elden Ring that have been taking off in recent years. It's not even the difficulty thing anymore. Nowadays, racers just aren't in demand as much as they used to be, especially not street racers. I want another Midnight Club game though, and I believe that I want one so we can have the street racer that has more of that non-linearity, has that difficulty, rather than just holding down X and following an arrow. If I can never get one ever again though, make this the best racer that you have played rather than making it the best racer that you will never play. There will always be consistency issues with this franchise, and that's the identity of it. Some people hate 1, some people hate Midnight Club 2, some people hate Midnight Club 3, and some people hate the realism of LA. But in actuality, they're all pretty damn great games, especially 2, 3, and LA. They're all great for different reasons, and that's the consistency of Midnight Club. The beauty of the series, seeing the games evolve from the new Rage engine is one of the most satisfying transitions of a franchise to a new engine that I have ever seen. And yes, it was satisfying because they needed to bend what Midnight Club was to this new engine, because this new engine was focused on physics, it was focused on realistic ragdoll, and so they needed to bend what Midnight Club was going to be for Rage. And they did it pretty damn perfectly. Test the limits of this engine, but also see where the strengths would lie. It's why you see the Rage engine constantly being tested in every game that Rockstar puts out, from the AI pathing in GTA 5 with the NPCs, to the weather effects in Red Dead 2, to the physics of GTA 4. We'll never know what's on the horizon, what are the next limits to be tested in Grand Theft Auto 6 with the Rage engine, but one thing that I believe, one thing that is my opinion, is that I think to this day that Angel Studios, better known as Rockstar San Diego, has still been the main proprietor to updating this engine. Think about it like this. Let's make the difference between Rockstar and Bethesda. Bethesda has been updating the same raggedy engine since the mid-2000s. Bethesda has less than 500 employees, so when they are creating updates for their engine, that makes me think they get most of their staff, or a very small amount of them, to start updating it. Rockstar, across all of its studios, has over 2,000 employees. That makes me think that they have San Diego working on the engine improvements before working on their next title, like Red Dead 1, 2, or 3. They have way more Rockstar Studios to help out on Red Dead 2, but that's almost my point. It seems like whether it's San Diego or if it's another Rockstar studio, Rockstar always has somebody or multiple studios working on improving this engine, because I'm sorry, but if you look at GTA 4, 5, Red Dead 1 and 2, and GTA 6 now, you cannot convince me that they look even remotely the same. There has been constant updating going on with that engine ever since GTA 4 came out. Going from the breathtaking details of GTA 4 to the horse balls shrinking in Red Dead 2, there is always improvements happening to that engine. So either one of the studios, a small team of people, or Rockstar San Diego, or somebody is constantly making improvements while they're even working on their next game. 2,000 employees can get a lot done. Less than 500 causes games that Bethesda comes out with, for example, like Starfield, to get a lot of criticism because the game feels like it was made in 2009. That's the difference between an engine that came out in the mid-2000s with Bethesda versus Rockstar. That's the difference. They're constantly updating, constantly improving, using a small group of people. My point here is that Rockstar San Diego has made one of the most influential engines ever conceived in video gaming. I feel like they still constantly improve that every year, and there is a difference between why every Call of Duty game looks exactly the same nowadays, a Bethesda engine where the game constantly feels buggy still, but yet Rockstar games, every single time you see a new one, it looks like it knocks it out of the fucking park. It looks totally different from the last game, because they always have hundreds of employees probably working on this engine. Angel Studios proved themselves through Red Dead in terms of sales, but I believe they proved themselves time and time again before Red Dead, even if nobody played it. Midnight Club 1 was the hardest game in the series for me. Midnight Club 2 was the most over-the-top game in the series. Midnight Club 3 was the best overall package, and Midnight Club LA is the most intense game of the series due to the beautiful camera work and the constant momentum of the game due to the engine that allowed the racing game to never stop. The game just never stopped. ever. Which, by the way, stopping in a racing game should be a sin, but surprisingly, it's actually something that a lot of racers deal with. They have boggled down systems like gambling wheels, overly complicated AI, or just plain microtransactions being shoved in front of your face every second, or the menus that are just for everything. There's a menu. There is constant stopping in so many racers nowadays. LA had none of that. It barely even had a UI system. It was just the cleanest and most high momentum racer that you could play due to the no technical limitations and the game constantly just wanting you to do the next race. I know games still do this nowadays, but racing games in particular, something I kind of miss is just the idea of making you want to play a race after a race after a race after a race, rather than just trying to convince you to buy more stuff or do more challenges just to be able to get more XP or whatever. The whole point was just wanting to get you to race to race to race to race, to have cop pursuit chases and to do all this stuff. It was all about you just experiencing the speed of this game, going from one thing to the next thing to the next thing to the next thing, and every single one of those things was going to be fun for you. It was never about stopping it to just remind you to purchase something. It was never about just getting you to do some gambling wheel or whatever. It gives you that crack feeling, that ideal game feeling. You know the feeling. I can do one more race. I can do one more. I can just do one more. Let me try again, one more time. After you just completed one race after losing 20 times in a row, you're still just saying, give me one more try, give me one more try, one more race, one more race. Even if you're 2 minutes from an appointment that you have to be at. That is the ideal feeling when playing a video game. And most of the time, I just don't get that feeling, especially with racing games nowadays. Midnight Club 5 was never announced. It was in development for sure, that's been confirmed, but it was canceled. 2 years ago, though, there was a job posting, which a lot of people believe is Midnight Club 5. That job posting was made by Take-Two for a company called Visual Concepts, where they were hiring for an unannounced racing open world game. Take-Two only has one racing franchise, and that is Midnight Club. Yes, it is an open world game, so everybody was right to think that that was going to be Midnight Club 5, except I'm going to burst everybody's bubble, and I'm going to say that that job listing was for Lego 2K Drive, which was made by Visual Concepts in 2023. I'm sorry, guys. It's not fair. I would have thought the same. I'm very happy I didn't play these video games 2 years ago, because then I would have been ecstatic for a Midnight Club 5. That's just honestly cruel. That's cruel. That should be considered cruel and unusual punishment. They should be fined for that. The possibility of getting a new Midnight Club anytime soon is very low, practically non-existent. But I have hope that after Grand Theft Auto 6, we may finally see a return to Rockstar putting a bunch of resources into bringing other single-player games to the table. But I also said that after Red Dead 2, and look where we are today. You can blame Take-Two for this, thinking that they're well off with the GTA Online machine. You can blame whoever. Honestly, I wouldn't blame anybody, because there's no point in just pointing blame. But I just want more games from this studio, and I know things are more complicated than that behind closed doors. I know that it's not just as simple as snapping your finger and making more games. I know that there's some reasons that are personal that prevents them from making games, or there's some money reasons or some labor reasons, and it purely comes from the selfish consumer that I am, that loves every second I spend with a new Rockstar game, new and old. I would just like something other than GTA and Red Dead. I think that's my main request. Did you grow up playing Midnight Club? Have you ever played it? Or if you haven't, just go and get it today. Get Midnight Club 3, get any one of them, dude. Honestly, go for it. Go play it right now. What is your favorite Midnight Club game and why? It's crazy to me because some people really do hate LA. Some people hate the first 2 games of the series, and some people don't like Midnight Club 3 either. And to me, the attachment that you have is probably because it's your first Midnight Club game, but prove me wrong. Comment below which game in the series is your favorite and tell me why, because in this video, we're all about appreciating Midnight Club here, no matter which one is your favorite. And we will be moving on to Grand Theft Auto 3 with this Rockstar Retrospective series. You can also watch the Call of Duty series I made that quite literally the Treyarch video is almost at 500,000 views. Let's go on that. You all are the best. Jump on board that appreciation train because you already know what we're doing out here. We are going to be appreciating every single little piece of art out there. And I will see you there.